Hi, it's me Olivia, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the comment. Thanks. Where do I begin this strange tale? I guess it begins by introducing myself. My name is Jim Matthews and I am, or was, a 5 feet 8 inches 150 pounds male. Now? Well, I am 5 feet 4 inches 110 pounds. And, undeniably female. How did this happen? It all started a year ago when I moved from New York to California looking for a fresh start. My life had been one disaster after another since dropping out of college, and the small town I was living in with my folks had very little in the way of career opportunities unless you wanted to work on a farm or at the local farm co-op. Somehow I knew that neither of those was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and I began planning to move out west. My parents weren't too pleased with what I was planning, but, after many long talks over dinner and late into several evenings, I convinced them that this move would be the best thing I could do for myself. I had to see what was out there in the real world, away from home and the farm, and the best way to do it, I argued, was to go and do it. I had managed to save up a pretty good chunk of money from my job at the grain elevator and had a couple $1,000s from a trust fund from an uncle who had died a few years earlier, so I decided to go ahead and make the move once the crops were in and the elevator was going into its seasonal slowdown. I had written to a college friend who lived in Los Angeles, and he had said that I could stay with him for a while until I had found work and could move into a place of my own. He told me that he had a big place thanks to some investments of his that had paid off big time, and that I could stay as long as I needed or wanted to. He also said that he might even have a job lead for me as he was currently invested in a new business that was just starting up and needed good dependable people. Well, that pretty much settled it for me, and I quit my job at the grain elevator and packed up my stuff. The morning I left, my folks were tearful, as was I, but we all knew that this was something I had to do. As I pulled away from the old homestead, I felt kind of sad but, at the same time, very excited. Other than the 2 years I had spent at college, I had never been away from home for more than a week or two at any one time. At the ripe old age of 24, I was still a babe in the woods when it came to understanding what it took to get along in the real world. Hell, I had never even had a real girlfriend. Just a couple of casual things at college which never turned into anything but what amounted to quickies. So I was really anticipating great things ahead for me in my life. If I had known then what I know now, I would have turned around, gone back to the farm and lived the rest of my life safe and secure with the crops and the cows. I had planned on about a week of careful sightseeing on the drive to California, and actually took a bit longer than that, stopping at the Grand Canyon and Las Vegas on the way. When I finally pulled in at my friend's place, it was 9 days after I had left home and I was bushed. He wanted to go out that same night and celebrate my safe arrival, but I was so tired from the trip that I just carried my things in, called my folks to let them know I had arrived safely, and told Carrie, my friend, that I just wanted to sleep for a few weeks. He said he understood, and even though he really wanted to celebrate, he showed me where everything was, in the apartment, and left me to my own devices. He gave me a set of keys to the place and, after making sure I knew where everything was and how it worked, took off for an evening of fun while I just took a long, hot shower and hit the hay. When I woke up it was 11:30 the next morning and, after a quick shower, I looked around the apartment a little more carefully. What I found amazed me. There was a pool outside and down the stairs that I could see from the balcony. What's more, there was a jacuzzi in the bathroom and an exercise room right there in the apartment. I thought to myself, well, Jim, old boy, looks like you just fell into the sweetest deal ever. I looked around some more, familiarizing myself with the rest of the place, and found that there were 3 bedrooms plus the exercise room, a large living room, and a combination kitchen/dining room divided by a long, low counter. On the refrigerator I found a note from Carrie saying that he had gone to pick up some groceries and inviting me to take my time about settling in. It also said that he would be back in a couple of hours and was signed and time dated at 10:30 a.m. Well, I fixed myself some eggs and toast and sat down to eat. The sun was shining outside and I could almost feel excitement in the air as I contemplated what my life out here might be like. I pictured parties, girls, and lots of good times with new friends. As it turned out, I was pretty close to right. Carrie got back just as I was finishing up with breakfast, and we sat down after putting the groceries away to talk. After a bit, he got around to telling me about the job opportunity he had found for me. It was with a brand new delivery company called AG Delivery. I asked him what the AG stood for, but he just got a funny look on his face and said I would find out if and when I was hired. I thought this was a little odd, but then, Carrie was a little odd by my New York standards, so I wrote it off as just West Coast strangeness that I would have to get used to. Carrie told me that he was heavily invested in this new business and everything depended on its success. If it failed, both he and I would be looking for a much cheaper and less luxurious place to live. I told him that he could depend on me doing my very best to make the business a success, and he smiled at me and said that he knew I would. That was the reason he had told me about it and had invited me to stay with him. It would be much easier on me, just getting started, to not have to worry about finding a place to live and worry about whether a new business was going to make a go of it at the same time. He also told me that I had an interview with the manager of the place, a friend of his, tomorrow at 10 a.m. sharp, so, today, he was going to take me shopping for some good clothes so I would make a good impression. True to his word, once I got dressed, we piled into his vintage Mustang and headed into downtown LA. The traffic was not too bad since we were traveling in between rush hours, and we made it downtown in about a half hour or so. Carrie found a place to park and we entered the men's store Carrie had said would make me look like $1 million. Well, he was right. Of course it almost cost that much, or at least it seemed to me that it did. I had never before in my life paid $400 for a suit, even if it did include 2 pairs of pants and a vest, but Carrie assured me that $400 was cheap for a good well-fitted suit out here and that it did look good on me, and besides, I could use it on more occasions than just a job interview. We spent the rest of the day sightseeing and Carrie showed me some of the major points of interest. We also stopped at the Motor Vehicle Bureau and switched my registration and plates for my car over to California and had my car scheduled for an inspection, seeing as how California is a bit tougher on anti-pollution standards than the rest of the country. We went out that night and partied, but not too hard, and Carrie introduced me around to some of his friends. When we got home it was about midnight and we went straight to bed. Bright and early, about 7:30 the next morning, my alarm went off and I got ready to go in for my interview. Carrie was already up and we talked while I got dressed. He told me again just how much he had invested in this business and what it would mean to both of us if it worked out, and also how much he was depending on me making a good impression. I told him not to worry because I knew how much he was depending on the business and me, and that I wasn't about to let him down. We grabbed our things and jumped in his car and took off for downtown at about 8:30 and got mixed into the early morning rush hour traffic, but Carrie didn't seem worried, so I didn't let it bother me too much. It certainly was an experience, though, for me. I had never seen so many people trying to use the same piece of road at the same time. Carrie assured me that, in a couple of weeks I would be negotiating the traffic like a pro, and, while I had my doubts, I let it go rather than worry about it right then. My mind was on the interview and I wanted to make darn sure that I got the job. Carrie dropped me off in front of the place and went to park his car, telling me that he would be right in and would be right with me all the way, but the interview would just me and the manager. He also said something that puzzled me at the time, but my mind was too busy to register it just then. He said that I was just the right size and build for this job, and with a little help I would fit right in. I went in and told the receptionist that I was there for an interview, and she asked me to take a seat and she would call me when I could go in. About 10 minutes Carrie came in and sat down next to me, nodding at the receptionist. She smiled at him and said, "Good morning, Mr. Jackson. How nice to see you." And Carrie replied, "Good morning, Carol. This is an old college friend of mine, Jim Matthews, and I am hoping that he will be hired here today. I am sure that he will be a great asset to the place and will help get it off the ground and thriving in no time." Carol nodded at me and smiled an absolutely beautiful smile at me. Well, my heart just about melted right then and there. This was a gorgeous young girl of about 21 or so with lovely long blonde hair and the figure of a supermodel. I could feel myself getting aroused, and so I just nodded and said hello and started thinking about other things. The last thing I needed right then was to go into the interview hunched over trying to hide my arousal. Carrie chuckled at my distress and told me in a quiet voice, "She is one of the fringe benefits of working here. Just think about seeing her every day and hearing that beautiful voice saying good morning." I told Carrie that she certainly was an attractive incentive to getting hired, but for the moment, I was more concerned about first getting the job and making good. Carrie started to say something else, but just then, Carol's intercom sounded off and I heard her tell whoever was on the other end that Mr. Jackson was here and also that I was here for my interview. I couldn't hear what the voice on the other end said, but Carol smiled at us again and told Carrie that he could go in. Carrie said thanks and stood up, shook my hand and said that he was going to be just a minute inside and then I would be called in. I said okay and he went into what I assumed to be the manager's office and closed the door behind him. Carol said that Carrie and Mr. Franklin, the manager, were friends and business partners as well. It wasn't more than 5 minutes later that Carrie poked his head out and asked me to come in. I smiled at Carol and went into the office. I closed the door behind me and walked over to a big, middle-aged man who, I assumed, was Mr. Franklin. Carrie introduced us and winked at Mr. Franklin and wished me luck and left the office saying that he would wait for me outside. He left and closed the door. Mr. Franklin shook my hand and invited me to sit down, which I did. I won't bore you, the reader, with the details of the interview except to say that I was impressed by Mr. Franklin and he, apparently, was pleased with my responses to his questions. When we were finished, he stood up and shook my hand again and told me that as far as he was concerned I could start any time. He also said that there was a week's training for all new employees that would begin on the following Monday. I said that would be just fine with me and left the office, thanking him for the opportunity. When I left Mr. Franklin's office and closed the door, I gave Carrie the thumbs up, indicating that I had the job, and we high-fived right there in the outer office. Carol smiled at us and said to me, "Congratulations. I think you will enjoy working here." I was so excited I almost ran over and hugged her, but I stopped myself. Somehow it struck me that would not be the right thing to do, so I just said thanks a lot and Carrie and I left. All the way back to Carrie's car, we were whooping it up like a couple of high schoolers and high-fiving, and when we got in his car, he said, "Come on, man. We gotta go celebrate for sure now," so that's what we did. I don't remember too much of it because we got absolutely pie-eyed. I do remember the next morning, though, because not only did I have a major hangover, but I wasn't alone in bed. I couldn't remember where I met her, or even what her name was, but she was a very good-looking brunette, and it appeared to me that we had done quite a bit more than just sleep, judging from the disarray of the sheets and blankets on the bed. I staggered up out of the bed and into the bathroom to take care of business and try to find some aspirin or something to take care of the pounding behind my eyes. When I finished, I went back into the bedroom and started getting dressed. Somewhere in there, the girl woke up and moaned a little bit. She opened one eye and glared at me for a second, then said, "Oh my God, like what time is it?" in a squeaky voice. I looked at the clock radio and told her that it was 11 a.m. She squeaked louder and jumped out of the bed, naked, and ran into the bathroom. She came out just a few minutes later and grabbed her clothes and quickly got dressed, not looking at me. When she finished dressing, she asked me where the phone was and I told her. She ran out of the room and I could hear her calling for a cab. I shook my head in confusion, albeit gently because of the headache I still had. By the time I felt good enough to get up and leave the bedroom, she was having a cup of coffee with Carrie, waiting for her cab. It seemed like only 10 minutes or so before we heard the honk of a horn outside, and she grabbed her purse and ran out. I looked at Carrie and he looked at me and we both started to laugh. I said, between chuckles, "Who in the heck was that?" He said, "Damned if I know, Jim. I think you picked her up at that bar last night, but I've never seen her before." Oh great, I thought. My first one-night stand in California, and I don't even remember her name. Carrie and I sat down to eat breakfast, which he had cooked, and we talked about my new job. He told me more about the business, but kept talking around what the job actually entailed or what the AG stood for in the company's name. I wondered about that, briefly, but my headache drove the doubts out of my head and I just finished eating quietly. When we were done, Jim wanted to take me sightseeing again, and for the next 3 days that's what we did. He made me drive the route into and back from work to make sure I knew the way, but he never said anything more about the job. Looking back, I probably should have been more curious and asked more questions, but I was having too good a time sightseeing and looking at and drooling over the California girls. Monday, bright and early, I rose, took care of my morning business and left for work in plenty of time. I didn't want to be late on my first day, so I allowed an extra half hour. When I got there, I went into the office and Carol handed me some forms to fill out. It seemed like there were dozens of them and I sat there filling them out but not really reading each one thoroughly, figuring them to be just standard work forms and previous job listings and stuff like that. I wish I would have read them, now. After finishing the forms and handing them back to Carol, she directed me to the other side of the building where, she told me, training classes were beginning. I entered the training room and noticed a couple other people already there. We introduced ourselves and in just a few minutes, a very attractive brunette walked into the room and began to speak. I turned around and looked at her carefully and recognized her right away. It was my bed partner from the other night. She introduced herself and started telling us about the company and like that, but my mind was whirling. I hoped she would bear me no ill will for the other night, and I planned to talk to her about it when the training session ended for the day. She gave no indication of recognizing me throughout the day except to glare at me once or twice. I had a bad feeling about that, but I hoped we would be able to work out any difficulties. After a couple of hours we broke for lunch and I tried to approach her, but she left the room before I could get her attention. This bothered me a bit, but I figured I would have a chance to talk to her later, so I went to lunch with the other newbies. We talked a bit during lunch and we all wondered what the AG stood for in the company name, but nobody knew, and the few people we asked about it just gave us a funny smile and said nothing. After lunch the training continued, but the brunette wasn't there. One more mystery to figure out, I thought, and turned my attention to what the new trainer was saying. It turned out that AG delivery was a new concept in delivery companies. The drivers, which we would all be starting out as, were paid a minimum wage, but tipping by the customers was encouraged and, it was hoped, would make a big difference in our weekly pay. Through the training that week, we were told what was expected of us and how to treat customers and given maps of Los Angeles to memorize. The next 3 days of the training were dedicated to driving around LA and learning the layout of the streets. On the last day of training, we were told to report to a different room where we would be issued uniforms. Well, we all went down there and reported in, and this weird little guy came out from behind a counter and started taking all kinds of measurements. He whirled around us like a child's top for about 15 minutes, shouting out numbers and generally acting strangely. Then he ran back behind the counter and through a door which slammed shut behind him. I looked at the other guys and they looked at me and each other, and we all lost it. We were laughing so hard that we could hardly breathe. After a few minutes of that, we were beginning to calm down when the door reopened and that little guy came back out. He jumped up on the counter and yelled at us all to be quiet. Well, we all were sort of taken aback by this, and we did calm down some. When we were more or less quiet again, he began to speak, saying, "I have all your uniforms here with me, but you cannot open the packages until you have left the premises, and preferably not before you get back to your homes. You must wear your uniforms Monday when you report for work. If you do not, you will be fired immediately and blackballed all around this state, so you will never get another job in any delivery-based business ever. This was all explained in the forms you filled out this past Monday. A copy of all the forms that you filled out is included in the boxes containing your uniforms. If, for any reason you decide not to report for work Monday morning, you will also be blackballed. If you do report for work, wearing your uniforms and then decide not to take the job, you will be billed for the training you have undergone and blackballed until you have paid what you owe." Any questions? For a few minutes there was silence in that room. We all looked at one another in wonderment for a few minutes, and then a regular barrage of questions and angry comments began to besiege the little weird guy. He shouted at us to calm down, and when we did, he continued. All of the questions I heard can be answered by reading the forms included with your uniforms. I suggest you wear your uniforms over the weekend too, ahem, get used to them, and here he chuckled a little bit. See you Monday morning, girls. And with that comment he jumped off the counter and ran through the door and slammed it behind him. Girls? I thought in confusion. What the hell did he mean by that? A couple of us ran behind the counter and tried the door, but found it locked. What we found back there, however, was a large cart loaded with boxes with names on them and directions to the loading dock. After a few more minutes of talking and wondering, we decided to wheel the cart out to the dock and load the boxes into our cars, which we did. Each of us had 3 rather large boxes to load, and while they weren't heavy, they were bulky, and it took a bit of judicious squeezing to fit them in our cars, but we managed it and said goodbye to each other and took off for our respective homes or whatever. All the way home I kept replaying what that little guy had said, in my mind, trying to figure out what the heck his last words had meant. Maybe, I thought, he was trying to be funny or sarcastic, calling us girls like some Marine Corps drill sergeant or something like that. When I arrived back at Carrie's apartment I began unloading the boxes, having to make 3 trips up the stairs with them. Carrie wasn't home, so I took the boxes to my bedroom and stacked them in a corner while I went and got a shower and fixed supper for myself. I figured I would ask Carrie about all that had gone on when he got home, but by 9 p.m. he still wasn't back. I had looked around for a note or something that would let me know where he had gone and when he might be back, but found nothing, so I decided to start opening the boxes. It seemed odd that there were 3 boxes. I mean, that seemed like a lot of boxes for just a few uniforms, and I was really curious, so I began opening them. Inside the first one, marked 1, DOH. I found a manila envelope which contained all the forms that the little guy said would be there. I thought about reading them but was too curious about the rest of the contents, so I set them aside and continued unpacking. I found a rather large sealed clear plastic kind of body bag thing, only not as large as one of those. Taped to the bag was another manila envelope which I detached and opened. It said something about bodysuits, but I couldn't make heads nor tails of it, so I set it aside also. I did see a section marked unpacking instructions, so I didn't just rip into the large plastic bag thinking I might damage something. I thought I'd better leave that bag alone until I had a chance to read the instruction book or whatever it was that came with it, so I turned my attention to the other 2 boxes. They turned out to be uniforms. Wow, imagine my surprise. But seriously, they were uniforms all right, but obviously not for me. Let me explain what I found. In the first box was that large plastic bag. In the second box I found, well, they were skirts and blouses. In the third box, which I opened with more than a little trepidation, I found, gulp, undies. I mean cute little, feminine undies. Bras, panties, that kind of stuff. Well, I figured there had to have been some kind of major error made, and there was no way I was gonna wear that kind of stuff. In the first place, I had never in my life ever wanted or dreamed of having to wear any of that female kind of stuff, and, in the second place, it all looked kind of, well, small. I mean small. There was no way I would ever fit into any of that stuff even if I had wanted to, which I didn't. Susu, I waited until Carrie got home. Or at least, that was the plan, but at 3 o'clock in the morning Carrie came in, roaring drunk and in no mood to talk about anything. He gave me a bleary-eyed look or two and actually giggled once or twice and passed out somewhere near his bed. Well, big help he is, I thought to myself. Oh well, I'll just have to wait until he wakes up and sobers up later today. So I left a note on the door leading out of the apartment so that Carrie would be unable to miss it and went to bed. As it turned out, I had no cause to worry about Carrie leaving before I woke up. When I opened my eyes and looked at the clock, it indicated 10 a.m. and when I jumped out of bed to go and see if Carrie was still there, he was still sawing logs. I fixed myself some breakfast and waited around for Carrie to awaken. Finally, around 11:30, he began making noises in his room that indicated to me that he was preparing to rejoin the world of the living, however reluctantly. When he finally emerged from the bathroom after about another half hour and trudged into the kitchen, he looked like death warmed over, and I wondered how long it would be before I could get any sense out of him. After he had some coffee and some of the leftover food from my breakfast, he looked a bit better. He looked at me and said, "Did you ever have one of those nights?" Well, I did. I must have hit 8 bars last night and I don't remember coming home. I hope I didn't drive. I got up and looked out at the driveway and didn't see his car and turned back to Carrie, saying, "You must not have. I don't see the sting." He looked relieved at that, and after another few minutes I told him I had to talk to him about the job. He got a pained look on his face and kind of hemmed and hawed for a couple of seconds and then looked at me and said, "I wondered when this would come up." I guess I must have looked puzzled because he then said, "I guess you want an explanation, huh? I mean, I saw the unpacked boxes in the living room, but it doesn't look like you got very far with unpacking them. My guess is that you saw the clothing and freaked out, right?" I looked at him for a second or two and then, in a very sarcastic way, said, "Gee, you think? Just what the hell is that?" And I gestured towards the boxes, all about. I mean, obviously, there has been some kind of mistake made at the delivery company. There is no way in hell they could expect me to wear the clothing that was issued to me. That is all woman stuff. Now calm down, Jim. I can explain what happened and what all that is about. You might not like it and you might even want to hit me for it, but, just maybe, you will understand and maybe even thank me for the job opportunity when I am done. So for the next hour, Carrie explained to me just what, exactly was the deal here. He told me that AG delivery was a totally new concept in delivery for this area and probably the whole world. The idea was that all the drivers would be males, but they would all appear to be sexy females, thus becoming the Hooters of the delivery world, kinda. The idea was that guys would have fewer problems and absences. Also, guys would be better able to handle rough situations more easily because of their greater strength. In addition, the pay would be more than twice the standard beginning rate of pay, and tips would be solicited via the ads that would be starting on radio and TV Monday. With the starting pay and tips, the drivers could conceivably be making upwards of $20 per hour. In addition, there were full medical and dental plans in effect the minute we started training, as well as a full 401k plan and stock options for varying lengths of longevity in the company. Well, all that sounded real nice to me, but there was that little problem. Something about looking like a sexy female? Carrie told me again about all the money he had tied up in this venture and how important it was to both of our futures that it succeeded. By this time, I had gotten up from the kitchen table and was pacing back and forth, casting murderous glares at those damned boxes. Carrie said, "Look. Let's go in the living room and go through that stuff and I will try to explain how all this is gonna work. If you still think, after that you don't want to do this, well, I will get you out of your contract, somehow, and pay for your ticket back home, deal?" I glared at him but was somewhat mollified by his offer and said, "Okay, but I don't guarantee anything. I will listen to what you have to say, but it better be good. I don't see any way you are gonna get me into those clothes, let alone make me look like a sexy female." "That's what those boxes are all about, Jim," Carrie said. "Technology has advanced by leaps and bounds over the last 5 years. What once was considered to be impossible is now either totally possible or has already been accomplished." While he was talking, he had gone over to the largest of the 3 boxes and picked up that large plastic-wrapped package. He held it up with both hands and shook it at me, saying, "This little beauty here is the key to the whole thing, Jim. In this package is the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art bodysuit that has ever been made." He went back into the kitchen and found a pair of scissors and came back and began carefully cutting the package open. Well, folks, when Carrie got that thing out of its plastic wrap, I just lost it. I mean, falling down laughing. It looked like the worst example of those blow-up dolls you see advertised in some of those sleazy men's magazines. There's no way, I thought to myself, that this thing is gonna make anybody look like anything but ridiculous. Carrie waited until I had stopped laughing and pointing at that thing, and when I had, he told me that he was gonna show me just how the thing worked and help me with every step of the process. I figured, by that time, what the hell? I might as well play this out. After all, there was no way I would ever look like a sexy woman wearing that thing, right? So I followed Carrie into the bathroom where he started filling the tub with fairly hot water. He explained to me that the bodysuit had to soak in water hotter than 105 degrees, but no hotter than 130 degrees for 15 minutes before it was ready to wear. In the meantime, he instructed me to shave all the hair below the neck off my body. By this time, I was thinking that this whole thing was stupid, but I had said I would go along with it until I figured I could prove him wrong. Besides, hair grows back. So the worst I figured I would get out of this was a few hairless weeks. I also had to shave my face and then treat all the shaved areas with a cream Carrie gave me. He said it would prevent any rash from showing up from the shaving. Okay, so I went and did it. I have to admit, once I was done, being hairless was very weird. My legs and arms felt very naked and smooth and, well, kinda sexy. Anyway, by the time I was all done with that, Carrie said the suit was ready, so I went over to the tub to look at what I thought was gonna be a sorry-looking, soggy excuse for a woman's shape. Imagine my surprise when I looked into the tub and saw a naked, sexy woman apparently floating in the tub. She had long red hair and one hell of a shape, and her face was gorgeous. For a second I thought something had gone wrong and Carrie had drowned some poor girl in our bathtub, but, as I looked closer, I noticed that the girl looked kind of, well, deflated. Carrie began to drain the tub, and when it was pretty much done, took that deflated-looking woman's skin out of the tub to let it drain thoroughly. He told me to use the package of powder that was on the sink all over my body, especially in my groin and underarm areas. He said this was to make sure that the suit would be easy to get off at the end of the day. Otherwise it might stick in those areas and maybe even damage the suit. So I did what he asked me to do, and then we started getting that suit on me. At this point I could go into a lot of things very closely and in fine detail to titillate you, the reader, but I won't. Suffice it to say that after a bit of struggling trying to fit my 5 feet 8 inches 150 pounds frame into that 5 feet 4 inches slender woman's suit, we finally got to the point where Carrie was helping me pull the head over mine. It was somewhat stretched but had not torn the way I thought it might. It was tight, but not overly so, and I began to have doubts about what I had thought earlier. Maybe this silly thing would work. What then? But since I had kind of promised Carrie I would go through with this, we continued. Now my hair was kind of a long brush cut, and Carrie didn't think this would be a problem inside the suit, so we hadn't had to cut it. That might have called this whole thing off before it ever started. There was no way I would shave my head bald for this. Anyway, we pulled that head over my own, and for a few minutes I was blind and deaf and breathing got a bit tricky, but we got it down and began to fit it to my face. I could feel it stretching my own face back, compressing it a bit, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just weird feeling. Finally the eye holes on the face lined up with mine, and I could see again. Then, with a little fussing, the ears slipped in place over mine, and I could hear as well. Carrie then did something in the back of the neck of the suit, and I heard what sounded like a zipper being closed. Then Carrie said, "Done," in a triumphant-sounding voice. I looked in the full-length mirror on the back of the bathroom door and started to laugh again. "See, Carrie," I said, "does that," and I pointed at the image in the mirror, "look like any kind of sexy woman to you?" "It sure doesn't to me. I told you this was dumb," but about that time I felt something happening. The suit was shrinking and tightening on me. I began to panic, but Carrie hollered at me to not worry, this was normal and it wouldn't hurt. So I calmed down a bit and watched in the mirror, fascinated, as the suit began to shape my body into one I had never dreamed of having. In just a short time it was done, and Carrie had been right. It hadn't hurt or even been more than a little bit uncomfortable, but when it was done, oh my God! There, in the mirror, was the most beautiful red-haired, sexiest woman I had ever seen looking back at me. Well, I don't know exactly what I meant at that point, had the most gorgeous shape, and her red hair went all the way down past her shoulders, part of it hiding one breast from view. I just stood there and looked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I looked at her, my face I guess, but I couldn't see any lines around my eyes that would indicate that this was just a mask. But the suit wasn't quite done yet. It began to tighten just a bit more, and the lips seemed to mold themselves to mine, completely changing the way my lips looked. They became full and, well, I guess pouty is the word. Also my cheekbones looked higher and my nose and chin were smaller and much more feminine looking. Hell, even my teeth were different. Very even and very white. Then, the most frightening thing about this whole experience happened. As I turned to look at Carrie, one of the breasts brushed against the partially open door of the bathroom and I felt it. I felt a short little jolt of pain and more from that breast. I stopped, about 1 inch from absolute panic, and looked down at those lovely protrusions. My hands seemed drawn to them and I touched them carefully. I could feel both the fingers moving on the breasts and I felt the breasts being touched. I guess I must have grayed out about then because the next thing I knew, I was laying down on the couch in the living room with a blanket over me. I looked around and saw Carrie sitting in an easy chair not too far away and he was grinning like an idiot. "Well, Jim. Welcome back to California," he said in an amused-sounding tone of voice. I came off that couch like an Air Force missile coming out of its silo, shouting questions at Carrie all the way. He kind of shrank back in his chair, looking a bit frightened, but he shouted back at me until I finally ran out of steam. I kind of slumped back down on the couch, noticing that I was feeling every single thing I would normally have felt in my own body and in a few places my old body didn't have. Carrie got up from his chair and walked over to me. "Cover yourself up a bit, would you?" he said. "Seeing you, well, naked is a bit disconcerting." I grabbed the blanket and covered myself from the neck down, somewhat embarrassed at being naked in front of my friend, looking the way I did now. Carrie began to explain that the bodysuit would give me all the feeling that a real woman would feel. I could even feel a slight breeze on my face from an open window in the kitchen. The skin of this suit was just as sensitive as my own. Now I was getting scared. I started to babble at Carrie again, but he stopped me and said, "Before you get any more freaked out by this, that suit comes right off by soaking it in hot water again with no problems." This calmed me down quite a bit and I began to listen more to what Carrie was trying to tell me. He said that I would wear this suit for as long as I worked at AG Delivery, which, he told me, stood for all girl delivery, as would all of the people employed as drivers and delivery persons. Off duty we would not be required to wear the bodysuit after the first full week. He said that this 1-week break-in period was so we could become used to appearing and acting like the women we would seem to be. The suits allowed for all bodily functions and were self-regulating as far as body temperature was concerned. We could even bathe in them and actually get clean. Then Carrie told me the rest of it. In the box with the clothes were some videotapes that would teach me all the things I would need to look and feel feminine. Gestures, movement, fashion sense, even makeup and hairdressing knowledge. Well, now let me tell you. I thought about this whole thing for a long time, sitting there on that couch. I knew that I could just pack up my stuff and head back home and work on the farm or at the elevator for the rest of my life and be safe, and secure, and protected. But Carrie was depending on me and the other new hires to make this new company a success. Add to that the fact that I would much rather live in California where there are more women per square mile than there are anywhere else in the world. So, I figured I would do this for a while, until it became a success or went bust, no pun intended, and then I could move on. Meanwhile I would be making good money and Carrie even told me that if I did this for him, I wouldn't even have to pay rent or buy food. So with a lot of apprehension and reluctance I accepted Carrie's offer and we went ahead with our examination of the rest of the stuff in those damned boxes. Well, like I said earlier, there was a lot of women's underwear, bras and panties and other things I didn't know what to call them. There was also a funny-looking VCR with a helmet attached to it by a long wire. Kinda like a space helmet/headphones combination. Carrie said this was the thing that would help me adjust to looking and acting like a woman. So we set it up and put the first tape in and I put on the helmet phones and watched the first of 4 tapes. I guess I must have been more upset and weirded out than I thought because about 15 minutes into the tape I fell asleep and didn't wake up until it was over. When I woke up the tape was rewinding and I took off the helmet phones and walked over to the pile of underwear that we had folded and put on the coffee table. Carrie was nowhere around and I thought, well maybe he went out for something. Anyway, I walked over to that underwear and started looking through it again, a little more careful and interested this time. For some reason, I couldn't see anything really wrong about wearing it if it would help Carrie and the delivery company. Besides, I told myself, it is only underwear. Nobody else is gonna see it besides me, and maybe Carrie if he happened to walk in on me while I was dressing. I picked up a pretty light blue bra and found panties in the same color. I thought, what the hell, and went ahead and put them on. I somehow seemed to know just how to do it, and it didn't occur to me that this was unusual. Then I went over to the uniforms that were also stacked on the coffee table, big coffee table, and looked at them. They seemed pretty straightforward to me and, without hesitation, I picked out a matching set and put them on. A short brown wool skirt and a skimpy top that didn't cover much at all. I went and looked at myself in the mirror. That's not too bad at all, I said to myself, and I admired how nice the uniform fit me and how good it looked on me. Well, since that tape was 4 hours long and Carrie and I had talked for a couple of hours before that, I decided to get myself something to eat. I started to walk into the kitchen, but something seemed wrong. I stopped and thought about it for a minute, and then it came to me. Shoes. I was barefoot. I walked back to the boxes and found some pantyhose and some shoes that went with the uniform. Just some normal-looking shoes that any female delivery person would wear, if you consider 3-inch heels normal, but once I had them on, I felt much better. After all, a girl's outfit and shoes and stuff have to match, don't they? It wasn't until I had started cooking some soup and making a sandwich that it dawned on me that I was wearing women's clothes, and it didn't bother me. I quickly went back into the living room and picked up the tape I had just watched. The title on it was, Choosing Appropriate Clothing, What Every Working Woman Should Know. Volume 1-inch. Wow. I thought, if the first one did this for me, I am almost scared to find out what is on the others. I looked at the titles of the other tapes. They were, Choosing Appropriate Clothing Volume 2, Makeup and Jewelry, Accessories, Their Many Uses, Hair Care, and the last one was titled, Deportment, Mannerisms and Misc. Well, seeing what the first tape had done for me, I was almost scared to see what the rest would do, and that misc just frightened the hell out of me. What the hell could misc be? I decided that could wait until I had eaten and viewed the other tapes. Evidently the helmet phone thing was some kind of advanced sleep learning device, because I didn't remember hearing anything of the first tape I had watched, but, from the looks of what I was now wearing, my brain certainly heard and learned. I thought no more about that as my stomach decided to take the opportunity to grumble at me. Okay. Lunch is coming down in just a second. I thought at it, and into the kitchen I went. Curiously, though, when I sat down and began to eat, I couldn't eat as much as I thought I would. I ate slowly, chewing carefully until my hunger pains were gone, and then I stopped. I had only eaten half a bowl of soup and half of my sandwich. Normally I would have polished off twice that and gone back for more. When I had finished and put the dirty dishes in the washer, I sat down and looked at those tapes again. Did I want to watch the next one in the series, or wait until Carrie got back from wherever he had gone? I went ahead and set up the next tape in the VCR and put the device back on. Again, after I put the tape in and the helmet thing back on, I fell asleep, and when I awoke the tape was rewinding and Carrie was sitting in the chair across from me, smiling. I took off the helmet, and as I did, I noticed that there were a number of packages on the coffee table. They weren't there when I started this second tape, so Carrie must have brought them home with him. First things first, though. I had to get you from the couch and head for the bathroom. My bladder was screaming at me for relief. I made it there just in time and, after some quick readjustment of clothing, took care of business. What a weird feeling though to have to sit down to pee. And wipe after. Oh well, I guess I can get used to it since I sorta have to for now. Besides, I thought to myself as I got up from the toilet and caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror over the sink, I kinda look cute. Whoa. Wait a second here. I couldn't believe what I had just thought. I was already thinking of myself as a cute girl, and I had only been wearing this suit for a few hours. It had to be the tapes, I thought in a bit of a panic. I ran out of the bathroom headed for, well, I am not sure of where I was headed. Running just seemed to be the thing to do at the time, so I did it. I damn near ran over Carrie, who was headed towards the bathroom with a couple of bags full of stuff. As it was, I did knock the bags from his hands as I brushed past him at a gallop. Stuff went everywhere, and when I saw what the stuff was, I slowed down and stopped. It was makeup and hair things. The funny thing is, when I saw all that stuff, I looked at it and something in my brain went click, and the next thing I knew, I was helping Carrie pick the stuff up off the floor and examining it closely. I selected a double handful of containers, lipstick, blush, foundation, eyeliner, mascara and the like, and marched right back into the bathroom. Before I could stop to think about what I was doing, I started to apply the stuff to my face. I seemed to know what I was doing, and within 15 or 20 minutes, I was done. I looked at my face in the mirror with satisfaction, and I remember thinking, that's much better. How could I let Carrie see me without my makeup? While I was there, I brushed out my hair. When it was smooth and shiny and, well, cute looking, I put down the brush and opened the bathroom door and went back out to the living room feeling much better about myself. Carrie looked up at me when I came out of the bathroom, and I could see his eyes get wider the closer I got to him. I stopped right in front of him and smiled at him and said, well? What do you think? Am I foxy or what? And I giggled. I mean, a cute little feminine-sounding giggle. Oh man, what was happening to me? Those tapes and this suit. Were they getting to me? All of a sudden I was seized by the irresistible impulse to RIP off this damned suit and throw away those tapes. Carrie saw, I guess, that I was headed for Panicville and grabbed my arms and made me sit down on the couch. He talked to me in a slow, calm voice, and, in a couple of minutes I was feeling more in control again. I don't remember much of what he said, but, whatever it was, it worked. Finally, I looked up at Carrie and said, Carrie, what is happening to me here? Am I losing my mind, or what? He just smiled and said, no Jim, you're just fine. It's only natural that you would be feeling a bit lost right now. With all that those tapes are trying to teach you and the way that bodysuit makes you look, I don't wonder that you are a bit panicked. Just take some nice slow breaths and let the training filter back into your mind. You'll be just fine. If not, then we will just get you out of those clothes, wash off the makeup, which looks very nice on you, by the way, and get you out of that bodysuit and call the whole thing off. I'll understand, believe me. I would probably be going full goose bozo right about now if it was me inside that thing. He continued, you are really being one hell of a good friend to be doing this, and to help me and the company get going, and I really appreciate it, more than I can tell you. If this company goes belly up, I stand to lose everything I have worked for the past 3 years. I have put every spare penny I could lay my hands on into this venture, and, if it works, I, and you by the way, stand to make some really big returns on all that money. You see, I have bought stock in the company for you as well. Not a lot, but enough so that, if things go well, inside of 5 or 6 years you might never have to work again. My eyes grew wide at that, and I started to feel ashamed of what I was thinking a few minutes before. I was gonna tell Carrie that I couldn't do this. It was too much to ask. I was feeling trapped inside the feminine image I now saw in the mirror. Once I heard what Carrie was eyeing, however, I started to calm down again and thought about this whole thing. Okay, so I impersonate a pretty girl for a bit, do what I can to help the company get going, and then move up in the company and out of this suit. How hard could that be? I could feel the training take hold again, and I got up off the couch and walked over to a mirror. As I stood there I looked at the very pretty redhead looking back at me from the mirror, and I remember thinking, there is a lot riding on this and I do look hot. I turned back to Carrie and said, okay, my friend, you got me. Whatever it takes, you can count on me to do my best. Now what's next? And just like that, I was back in the frame of mind that the tapes had put me into. Carrie held up a small parcel that was securely wrapped in heavy, padded paper. Well, he said, I guess the next thing is what's in here. He carefully tore the package open, and I saw that there were 4 bottles of some kind of liquid, each surrounded by padding so they wouldn't break. According to the instructions that came with the bodysuit, this stuff is supposed to change your voice to a higher pitch so you sound more like a girl. Well, in for a penny and all that, I walked right over to him and took one of the bottles, opened it and drank it down. Carrie got a weird look on his face and tried to grab it from me before I finished it, but I'd had too much practice at chug-a-lugging during my college days and it was empty before he could grab it. How long does this stuff take to work, Carrie? I asked him. Jim, you were only supposed to take a sip of that stuff. According to the instructions, one sip will alter your voice to a female pitch for 10 hours. I don't know how long the whole bottle will take to wear off. He looked at the bottle and the instructions again and his shoulders kind of slumped a bit. Well, it says here that there are 10 doses in each bottle. Looks like it will take at least 100 hours for your voice will change back to normal. I started to say something like OHSHIT. But right in the middle of it my voice quit working. I cleared my throat a few times but nothing happened. No sound at all. Then, gradually, things started to happen. I could feel a strange feeling in my neck and I rushed over to the mirror to see if I could see anything happening there. As I watched, fascinated, my Adam's apple slowly shrank until it was gone. When I tried to speak again, my voice was beginning to come back, but it wasn't my voice. It was that kind of voice you hear if you are lucky, coming out of a phone when you call for phone sex. A breathy, high alto, sexy-sounding voice that sent shivers up and down my spine, and I was the one using that voice. I went back to the couch and sat down again, my head spinning a bit. But Carrie, I started to say, but that voice. No matter what I said, it sounded like an invitation to a wild evening of sex. I even tried to sound angry, but it just came out cute. As I sat there, trying to make yet another adjustment to my image, I reconfirmed my promise to Carrie in my mind. Okay, I had screwed up this voice thing, but it was only temporary, right? My voice would return to normal after 4 days or so, and then I could just take the correct amount each morning to change it back to this sexy, sultry-sounding one for the day. It would wear off after I got off work and I would be able to change back into gym for the evening and do what I wanted until the next morning, right? So I sighed, oh my god how that sounded with this voice, and Carrie, and I talked for a while so I could get used to it. As I talked I found myself sounding more and more feminine as I went along. Those tapes again, I thought to myself. Well, nothing for it but to go ahead. I was going to have to stay in this suit until at least Sunday night, then take it off, clean it out inside and out, and then put it back on Monday morning for work. Since my voice was going to stay like it now was for 4 days anyway, Carrie and I perused the instructions for the suit and found that it could be worn for 7 days before it had to be taken off for cleaning. In the meantime, I could just take a shower or bath in it and it would be okay for that long. Okay, I am stuck for at least 4 days in this suit and with this voice. I might as well watch the rest of the tapes and get this over with. First, though, Carrie suggested having something to eat. I couldn't argue with that as I was getting a bit hungry myself, so I said, okay, but it's your turn to cook. He looked at me and smiled and said, well, Jim, I really don't feel like cooking. What do you say we go out somewhere and get some takeout or eat at a nice restaurant? Well, my first reaction was something like, what? Looking like this? Are you out of your damn mind? This, delivered at the top of my cute, sounding new voice, sort of rocked Carrie back on his heels for a second or two, but he came right back at me with, okay, sheesh. Not so loud, will ya? The neighbors will call the cops, and how do you think we will be able to explain this? As he waved his hands in the general direction of, gulp, me. All right, Carrie, I said in a somewhat quieter sounding voice. I sat down and thought about going out to eat. Well, I said to myself, you gotta eat, and unless you want to cook, the only options are to order out or take Carrie up on his suggestion. Meanwhile, Carrie was telling me that, on Monday morning I would receive new identity documents, including a driver's license made out in my new name. These would stand up under any normal investigation and would help lessen the possibility of any of the new drivers for AG delivery being unduly harassed by the police if they should stop any of us for any minor traffic infraction. Since it sorta made sense to me that we should have ID that matched our new descriptions, I said nothing but kept listening. In the meantime, Carrie continued, you gotta look like that for the next 7 days, so you might as well get used to it and have a little fun with it. But Carrie, I interjected, the voice thing wears off in 4 days. Why did you just say I had to look like this for the next 7 days? I can take this suit off Thursday night, right? No, Jim, he said. Remember that you are required to wear the suit for the first 7 days in a row without removing it? That's so you can get used to looking, feeling, sounding, and acting like an attractive female. We don't want good-looking drivers walking around talking and acting like guys, right? Well, Carrie, I had forgotten about the 7 days thing, but what you say does make sense. How about this? We call out for pizza tonight and I watch the rest of those tapes. If they do anything like what the first 2 did, I should have no problems leaving the apartment and going out to eat tomorrow night, okay? I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing myself say, but, as I was saying it, I could feel the changes inside my head. I mean, I could remember very easily how I would have reacted to looking and sounding like before I had gotten this way, but now, it seemed almost natural to think the way I was beginning to think, which was, well, feminine. I seemed to have no problem with learning what those other 2 tapes would undoubtedly teach me. In fact, I almost wanted to watch them so as to complete the illusion I was supposed to portray. I guess Carrie agreed with me because he picked up the phone and ordered pizza and stuff for dinner, and I went over to the VCR and inserted the next tape, which was titled, Makeup and Jewelry, Their Many Uses in Hair Care. Whoopee, I thought. About a half hour later, the pizza arrived and, after we cleaned up from that, I sat down, put on that infernal helmet and started the tape. As before, about 15 minutes into the tape I must have fallen asleep because when I next realized anything, the tape was rewinding and Carrie was looking at me, from across the room. I sat there for a couple of minutes and then, the most curious thing happened. I got up from the couch and went straight to a mirror, and my first thought, upon gazing at myself in that mirror, was, oh my God. My face and hair are a mess, and I almost ran out of the room into the bathroom where I spent about a half hour repairing the damage done to my makeup and hair from dinner and the time I had spent with my head on the couch, apparently asleep. By the time my brain caught up with what my reflexes and body were doing, it was too late to stop any of it, so I just went into a kind of cruise control and let my hands do whatever they were doing. They seemed to know without any help from me, just what to do and how to do it. And then, it was done. Looking back at me from the bathroom mirror was an absolutely gorgeous redhead with perfect makeup and hair. I stared for a minute or two, not believing what my green eyes were telling me. Wait a second, went a thought in my head, green eyes? When did that happen? But another thought quickly took the place of that one, and it went like this. Well, naturally your eyes are green, dear. What other color could they possibly be with all that beautiful red hair? I turned from the mirror and walked out of the bathroom and back into the living room where Carrie was patiently waiting for me. Carrie, I said in an almost even tone of voice, let's take another look at the specs on this bodysuit, okay? I have a feeling there are some things we don't know about it yet. So we dug out the specs on the suit and started going over them a bit more carefully than we had before. Yep, there it was. Under the heading Temporary Changes, Subtitle 2. Evidently, after wearing the suit for more than 2 hours, the eyes would change color to most perfectly accent the hair color. The change in eye color would revert to normal eye color after being out of the suit for more than 2 hours. Along with that there was a bit about weight loss and figure shaping. My weight would match the specs on the suit and my body would retain the shape of the suit, also for 2 hours after removing it. Where the weight went, it didn't say. Phew. As Alice said, curiouser and curiouser. Well, nothing for it now, but to watch the final tape and see what IT would do to me. I was almost getting used to feeling and looking like I did now, and I was curious to see how that last tape would affect me. I knew that all these changes would fade and vanish once I was out of this bodysuit. The spec manual that came with it said it would, and they can't lie, right? I mean, that would be bad for their business. So, reassured that I could still quit this at any time I wanted, I popped the last tape in, sat down on the couch again and put on that damned helmet. I am gonna have to talk to the people that make these tapes, I thought. Don't they realize how this stupid helmet thing messes up one's hair? For hours later, I woke up. I sat there for a moment and then I took off the helmet and stored it away in the box it came in, along with the tapes. When I was done with that, I straightened up and looked at Carrie. He was giving me one of those, what the heck, looks. As I walked away from the living room and into the kitchen, I noticed that I seemed to be moving differently. I mean, I was swaying and mincing along on those heels that I had forgotten I was wearing, just as sexily as any natural-born woman would, and it seemed strange for a second, but then I thought, well, how else would I move? I am a woman, right? I mean, look at me. I am one foxy redhead with a dynamite figure and a face made for modeling. I am gorgeous. I looked back at Carrie and he still had that dumb look on his face. I giggled at him and said, "What's the matter, Carrie boy? Haven't you ever seen a woman before?" He kind of gurgled a little bit at me and seemed to be having problems finding his voice. When he finally did, it sounded like he was going through puberty all over again, kind of cracking and all over the scale. My gosh, Jim. I can't believe what I am seeing and hearing. I mean, I was at the test sessions of these bodysuits with all the other investors in AG delivery, but, wow. To actually see it happen right in front of me like this is absolutely amazing. You look incredible. If I didn't know that you are old pal, Jim inside a bodysuit, I swear, I would never believe it. I mean, the way you are moving, your voice, even little things like the way you hold your arms and hands, and here, my old college buddy, Carrie, shocked me and shook me to the foundations of my psyche. "You are sexy, my friend," he said in a wondering tone of voice. Even through the programming that I now realized was on those tapes, I felt a bit lost for a minute. I actually stopped and thought, he's right. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. With this suit on, and these clothes, the makeup, and hair, and all of it, I am hot. And I'm a guy. At that point, some more of the programming must have kicked in because my very next thought was, no. I can't be a guy. Not with this body and face. Not looking like I do. For about 10 minutes, this conflict raged through my mind. I sat down on a kitchen chair to try and settle my thoughts and remember who I really was. Then, something else clicked and I could now think of myself as both a guy and as a woman. I mean, they were almost like separate parts of my mind, one side with female thoughts and one side with my male thoughts. I could, seemingly, access either side at will. This led to a series of dizzy spells as my mind attempted to make sense out of nonsense. It's a good thing I was already sitting down, or else I would have fallen down. Carrie and I decided, at that point, that I had gone through enough for one day. Maybe too much for one day. We packed everything else back into the boxes and called it a day. Sunday. I awoke and blearily looked at the clock radio next to my bed. 10:30 a.m. I laid there for a moment, still in that pleasant in-between place where I wasn't fully awake and wasn't fully asleep. As I became more wakeful, things started making their presences known. Things like breasts, and long hair in my face and, a lack of something between my legs. Not a dream. Nope. A few more seconds of disconnected thought and then I sat straight up, suddenly wide awake, as things remembered crashed in on me. The bodysuit, those tapes, the clothes. I threw back the blankets and gazed at what had to be the most gorgeous female body it had ever been my privilege to see, and another thought snuck up on me. Jim? That hot-looking redhead? She is you, curiously. I didn't freak out and start screaming. Instead, I admired the way my waist nipped into a slimness I had never known in my entire life, and continued on down, expanding as it went to lushly curved hips and the longest legs I had ever seen. And those breasts. To call them beautiful would have been damning them with faint praise. I cupped them in my slender and feminine hands and felt their weight. I didn't find any of this unusual and, somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought niggled at me that I should find this strange since I was not a woman. Oh well, enough of this, was my very next conscious thought, and I got off the bed and headed for the bathroom to attend to another pressing matter. As I sat there on the toilet, I remembered everything that had happened to me since Friday when I had opened those boxes, right up to last night's seeming revelations about what the bodysuit and those videotapes had done to me. I could, it seemed, access all of my memories as a guy named Jim Matthews, but I felt no embarrassment or discomfort with looking how I did now. I finished up and wiped and pulled up my panties, then stood facing the full-length mirror on the back of the bathroom door. Looking at my face, I examined it critically, noticing the smooth pale skin, full lips, sensuous green eyes and cute, slightly upturned nose. Very sexy-looking face, I remember thinking. I started drawing a bath thinking that, since this would be my first full day as a good-looking woman, I should be clean and fresh. I added some bath crystals that must have been left here by one of Carrie's girlfriends and, when the tub was full, I slid slowly into the hot, scented water. I could actually feel it as if it were my own skin. As I began to soap up, I also realized that I could feel every single movement of my hands on my skin just as if there were nothing there but real girl. Amazing, I thought to myself again. I never had even thought of experiencing something like this, and I sure as hell never thought I would be this calm about it if I ever did have the chance to experience it. Those tapes in this suit are incredible, absolutely freaking unbelievable. Well, I spent a long time in that tub, just feeling and experiencing the differences. No, I didn't do that, even though I was tempted. Somehow it just didn't seem to be very important to find out what it might feel like to have a female orgasm. It was much more important to be clean and sweet-smelling and ready to face what would be, I was sure, a very busy day. I opened the bathroom door and went back into my bedroom and started selecting clothes for the day. I seemed to know exactly what to choose and how it would look on me. After the steamy air in the bathroom had cleared, I went back in and carefully began to apply some makeup. Again, I seemed to know just how to apply it and how much to use. With my hair wrapped up in one of those turban things that women always seem to use to get the extra moisture out of their hair after a bath or shower, I performed the age-old ritual of making myself pretty without any wasted motions. When I was done with that, I took the turban off my head and began drying my hair. That went very smoothly and much faster than I thought it would, and when I finished with that and brushing my hair out, I, as Ricardo might have said, looked marvelous, darling. As I left the bathroom wearing just panties, my hips swaying back and forth and my breasts jiggling, I heard noises from the direction of Carrie's room, indicating to me that he was also waking up. I hurried across the hall into my bedroom and closed the door. After all, a girl can't have her best guy friend seeing her in just her flimsies and skimpies, right? I dressed in the clothes I had chosen, basically just another of the uniforms, a pair of light blue short shorts and a very pretty white blouse with small pearl buttons, and opened the door to go to the kitchen to prepare some breakfast. I stopped, briefly at the boxes and found a pair of 3-inch heels that just seemed to go with the outfit I was wearing and slipped them on and continued into the kitchen, having no problems walking in those heels and not even really thinking about it, then. As I started cooking eggs, bacon and toast, I found myself humming a little tune and sounding, for all the world like a happy girl starting the day. About 10 minutes later, Carrie staggered into the kitchen, wearing a bathrobe and a thick layer of beard. Carrie isn't a morning person, or had you figured that out for yourselves by now? He started the coffee maker and looked at me. His face went from tired looking to an expression of what they, in about 2 seconds and finally settled down to a bemused look of curious wonder. I smiled at him and chirped, "Good morning, Carrie," in my new high feminine voice, and he seemed to hesitate a minute before he answered me. "Jim, that is still you in there, right?" he said in a tone of voice that indicated to me that he wasn't completely sure of what my answer might be. "Of course it is, hun," I replied. "It's just a different Jim than you remember, is all. I mean, I am still Jim, but I feel very comfortable with the way I look and feel right now. The way I am moving and acting feels totally normal to me, and although I know who I am and remember all of the things that make me Jim, I still feel very feminine and, strangely enough, unconcerned about my changed appearance and actions." "So, what would you like for breakfast?" I asked him, turning back to the stove. I think just coffee," he responded. "Lots and lots of coffee. This is gonna take some getting used to, my friend." Oh, he added, there are a lot of things in those bags I brought back yesterday. Clothes, jewelry, and more shoes and underwear. I figured that you wouldn't want to wear just the uniforms all the time this week, and I picked up some things while I was out. I actually squealed in delight at that and, taking the still unfinished breakfast off the burners, I ran into the living room to investigate the contents of those bags. I found several skirts and blouses along with some very naughty-looking underwear that had to have come from Victoria's Secret. I also found several pairs of earrings, some necklaces, bracelets and even rings, and a very feminine-looking watch. I was actually very excited over all these female goodies and couldn't wait to try them on, but I decided to finish breakfast first. I did pick out some matching earrings, a necklace, and a couple of bracelets that looked good with what I was wearing and put them on, feeling somehow more complete. Then I went back into the kitchen to finish cooking and, on the way, I actually hugged Carrie. He was a bit shocked but, after a second or two, returned the hug. "Thank you so very much, Carrie," I murmured into his chest. "You have been really helpful and kind to me through all of this, and I really appreciate what you have done for me in helping me get this job and everything. The clothes are just lovely and I really love them and all the other things you bought for me. I know I should be really freaked out over all of this, but, somehow, I'm not. It must be the programming from those tapes and, even knowing that, I am still very happy right now. This whole thing is turning into the adventure of a lifetime for me, and even if it doesn't work, I will always be grateful to you for giving me this chance." Carrie and I held the hug for a couple of minutes and then I felt him tense up and he gently broke the hug, saying, Jim, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. I mean, the way you look right now makes me want to hold you and, well, other things, but I have to remember that inside all of that is my old college drinking buddy Jim Marshall, the guy I chased women with and got drunk with. Let's just keep things on an even keel here and I will try my best to remember who you really are. I hope you will do the same because things could get awfully weird and complicated if either one of us forgets, and I don't think I want to go there. I gave Carrie a little pout and said, "Okay, you old spoilsport, but don't blame me if I find it difficult to maintain a discreet distance from you. The way I feel right now, well, I enjoyed that hug and I think I want more of it. Oh, I know what I'm saying and how it sounds to you, knowing that I am guy inside this suit, but I do feel an attraction to you and I kinda like it." Again, Carrie got that odd look on his face that I had seen a few other times this weekend. A kind of bemused/wondering/almost sad look, that I really hadn't connected with anything but was becoming a bit worrisome to me. Oh well, I couldn't think about that now. I was feeling too good about just being alive on this first morning of my new life. The thing is, I never felt out of place or weird about what I was doing through all of this. The programming in those tapes wouldn't let me. It made me feel comfortable with looking and feeling and acting like a woman. So, once breakfast was out of the way and Carrie had showered and gotten dressed, we decided to go out and do a little shopping and getting used to me looking like I did. All through the rest of the day, I did notice the differences between the way I was doing things as I was now, as opposed to the way I would have done the same things as Jim. Just walking was different, with my hips swaying back and forth drawing looks from men wherever we went, and it seemed to me that every time I noticed some guy watching me, I put a little bit extra into my walk, making my hips sway just that much more. I noticed the jiggling of my breasts, but not as much as you might think. After a couple of hours, I actually forgot about it, or at least paid no more attention to it. Carrie and I shopped a bit, and I embarrassed him a couple of times in places like Victoria's and Frederick's, where I loudly asked his opinion on one flimsy piece of underwear or another and gaily laughing at him when he'd turn red. I just felt great. I was actually having fun as a woman and didn't think anything about it. We stopped and ate at a nice restaurant and I had my first chance to use a ladies' room. The stories are right, by the way. For the most part, ladies' bathrooms are much cleaner and larger than men's rooms. Offsetting that is the occasional line one has to wait in and pray that the hold-it-in muscles are in good shape. Anyway, after being out for about 6 hours, we headed back to the apartment to wind down and prepare me for my first day of work. We got back at about 6 p.m. and, while I put away the few things I had bought along with the things Carrie had gotten me the day before, Carrie went about ordering dinner from a really nice place he knew about that actually delivered things like prime rib. Dinner arrived about an hour later, and after we ate and cleaned up the dishes, we sat and talked about this and that. We went over exactly what we knew and didn't know about the bodysuit and the programming on those tapes. Then we both showered, separately, thank you, and got ready for a quiet evening of television. Around 11 p.m. I called it a night and went to bed. Yes, I did experiment with my new body that night. It was interesting, and enough said about that. I awoke with the alarm clock beeping at me, and as I reached out to shut it off, I took notice of the smooth and very feminine hand and nails at the end of my hairless arm, but other than noticing it, I paid no real attention to it. I padded into the bathroom and began drawing a bath. I wanted to be as fresh and feminine as I could possibly be for my first day at my new job. I was very excited and anxious to begin work, and as soon as I felt I was clean enough, I jumped out of the tub and dried off. It took me about 45 minutes to do my hair and makeup, and then I dressed in the wool skirt and white tie-off top that I had worn the first time I had tried on the uniforms, and added earrings, bracelets, and a matching necklace along with a few rings. Then I grabbed my keys and headed out the door to my car. Taped to my steering wheel, I found a note from Carrie. It said, "Best of luck on your first day. I'll be pulling for you, but I know you will be great at your new job and in your new role." New role? I wondered what he meant by that, exactly. I mean, okay, maybe you could consider posing as a woman to get work a role, but somehow I didn't think Carrie meant it that way. Don't ask me why I thought that, but there was a small something niggling at the back of my mind. I just couldn't put words to it. Oh well, it was a beautiful day and I was going to my first day at a new job, and my mood improved quickly until I forgot about that small something and just enjoyed driving with the wind in my hair. As I pulled into the parking lot at AG Delivery, I noticed some of the cars that belonged to the other new men that I had met in the training program. I parked my car, grabbed my purse and locked the car doors. I walked unhurriedly into the building and found Carol waiting there with a clipboard. She looked at me and smiled. "I'm glad to see you, Jim. I told everyone that you would be one of the ones who didn't back out of this job just because it was too weird to be impersonating a woman. Now, the first thing we have to do is find a feminine name for you. It seems ridiculous to be calling a beautiful woman Jim," and she laughed a little bit at that. "Well," I said, "how about Ginny? That's pretty close to Jimmy, and that's what a lot of people have called me over the years. That way I won't be surprised or confused when someone calls me Ginny." Carol smiled at me again and said, "That's just perfect. From now on, when you are at work or in your suit, you are Ginny," and she wrote something on that clipboard she had. Then she looked up at me and said, "Why don't you go ahead into the briefing room," and she pointed towards a room behind her, "and meet the rest of the new girls." I smiled at her and said thanks and moved around her and into the room she had indicated. As I entered the briefing room, I saw 4 other women seated around a table, and I walked over to join them. We reintroduced ourselves, and while we all had what I would call a sheepish smile on our faces, no one seemed to be the least bit uncomfortable with looking like we did. Carl had become Carla, a very attractive blonde just a bit taller than I. Jerry had become Jerry, a dynamite brunette just the same size as I. Danny had become Dana, a knockout with long, lustrous black hair, and Terry had become Terry, an absolutely gorgeous blonde about 4 inches taller than I now was. We sat there and talked about our experiences over the weekend and our expectations about our first day at this new job. I wondered when we were going to actually get started, but I felt quite at ease talking with these women who, just last Friday, had been men just like me. No one seemed to be the least bit concerned or embarrassed about their sudden sex change, and we chatted like old friends. Just then I realized that Frank wasn't here. He had seemed really disgruntled about all the things that happened last Friday, and I had wondered if he would show up today, even considering the veiled and not so veiled threats that had been leveled at us when we had picked up all our boxes full of stuff. I knew, or at least I assumed, that all those threats were probably just so much smoke to get us to at least try to do this job and see if this wild experiment would actually work or not. Certainly no one could blackball anyone for not showing up or for deciding not to take part in what was certainly a strange kind of job. I had figured that if anyone had decided not to show up, the company would just get their bodysuit and clothes back and the person would be able to go on their way. Surely nobody would be prevented from trying to get another job just because they didn't want to impersonate a woman. We talked about Frank and some other things for a bit until Carol came in with another woman, a very attractive redhead with slightly darker hair than mine. She was introduced as Ms. Smith, the dispatcher/driver's representative. Carol told us that she would be our representative with the union, which we all would have to join, and for any disputes with management, she would be our liaison. Carol then began to fill us in on our new duties. We would be assigned routes in different areas of LA, so there would be no duplication of effort. Our hours would be from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays through Fridays, with an occasional Saturday morning if some deliveries couldn't be made during the week for one reason or another. We were required to wear our bodysuits constantly during work hours and, additionally, might be asked to wear them at certain other times if the company needed us to any PR work like commercials of public meetings. We were instructed to be very polite to all of the customers we delivered to and, as a matter of fact, we were told to be always smiling and happy appearing because it would reflect well on the company. Our time off was our own and we could spend it any way we wanted as long as we did nothing that would make the company look bad. We would be allowed to wear our bodysuits if we wanted, while off duty, but if we did, we would be under even closer scrutiny because we would be recognizable as drivers for the company. We were also told a few more things about our bodysuits. First and foremost was the fact that they were as tough and resilient as our own skin. If they got cut, they would heal much the same as our own skin as long as the cut wasn't too large or deep. I mean, they wouldn't regrow a cut-off finger or anything like that, but for smaller things like one would get as a consequence of everyday living, they were just as resilient as our own skin and maybe just a shade tougher. They would tan as our own skin would, so we could even wear them to the beach if we wanted to. They were, however, highly resistant to the cancer-causing rays of the sun, so, in that sense, they were actually better than our own skin. Other than that and a few small matters of maintenance, they bodysuits could be treated as if it were our own skin. Then, Carol spent some time explaining about the business and its goals. We first new hires were to be the vanguard, as it were, of more like us. If we proved to be successful, a lot more people would be hired. The ultimate goal was to have over 100 drivers and delivery people working at AG Deliveries, and we would be delivering mainly to the downtown business community where, obviously, the money was. Since we 5 were the first hired, and were the ones upon whom the success of the company would hinge, we were offered all the incentive packages that I mentioned earlier, like full hospitalization and dental plans, a full participation 401k plan and stock options, as well as travel and meal allowances. The fact that we were really men wearing female bodysuits was to be kept a deep dark secret for obvious reasons. If the word ever leaked out that we weren't really women, all kinds of flack would come down on the company from women's groups, the ACLU, and the state government. The idea was, though, with our own male strength and the shapes of good-looking women, the work and lifting involved with the job would be easier and we would be better able to handle ourselves in any kind of physical emergency like self-defense. I know, some of you out there are saying, well, that is a really sexist thing to say and think, and I can't argue with you. I only know what they told us and it seemed to make sense to us at the time. It was lunchtime by the time Carol and Ms. Smith finished with their briefings, and so we all trooped across the street to a nice little restaurant and ordered. We used the time it took for our food to arrive to get to know one another a little bit better, and by the time our food did arrive we were all a lot more comfortable with one another, seemingly on our way to becoming friends. After lunch we all went back across the street and were taken, by Carol and Ms. Smith, to the garage where our new delivery vehicles were parked, for our first look at them. They were sharp, I must admit. Sleek oversized vans, much the same size as a UPS truck but much more streamlined and painted, well, bright pink. It's a good thing that the programming on those tapes had me feeling so comfortable with being a woman, or I, my old male self, would have been terminally embarrassed to be seen anywhere in the vicinity of one of those, way too feminine, vehicles. On the side of each one of the vans were the words, AG Deliveries, and underneath the words, the company logo, which consisted of a very pretty cartoon of a lovely woman in the AG Deliveries uniform handing a package to a business-suited man. Both had big smiles on their faces, and the male figure seemed to be looking directly at the delivery girl's, well, chest. I wondered if this cartoon might not be a bit too much, as I figured that it would draw the wrath of many civil liberties groups, but I didn't say anything. I assumed that the powers that be in the company would have made sure that everything was kosher, legally, and I didn't feel it was my place to question their decisions, at least not right then. Maybe later I would ask Carrie of Carol about it. We got in one of the vans and Carol and Ms. Smith showed us the layout of the dashboard and where all the controls were. Every van had a full communications setup, and they were all air-conditioned and equipped with state-of-the-art built-in AM/FM/cassette/disc stereo systems designed to automatically lower the volume whenever a call came in on the two-way radios. After our familiarization with the layout of the vans, we each drove one around the parking lot for a while to get used to the handling of such a large vehicle. There was a sort of driving course laid out on the pavement of the lot, and we all had to drive that course until we could all maneuver the large vehicle without problems. Automatic transmissions and power steering helped a lot. Once we mastered the course, we all went for a drive in the city itself for further training. Inside each van was a booklet describing exactly what to do in the case of an emergency, whether it was just a flat tire or a traffic stop, right up to and including what to do in the event of a major accident. Every van was also equipped with a satellite tracking system and a fully stocked first aid kit. It seemed that nothing had been overlooked. There were even 3 fire extinguishers located strategically about the vehicle. Very impressive, I remember thinking. The RSST of our first day was spent going over procedures and signing paperwork. Some of that paperwork was, apparently, to legalize our identities for the purposes of obtaining driver's licenses for all of us with our female names and pictures on them. We were told that they would be ready for us when we came in for work the following morning. Now, I imagine it has crossed all of your minds that it seems that an awful lot of money had been spent with no guarantee of any kind of commensurate return. I know it did cross my mind a time of too. Hell, looking at this thing logically, the cost of the bodysuits alone had to be in the tens of thousands of dollars, right? Well, don't overwork your logic circuits. All will become clear as I progress with my tale of my journey towards womanhood. As we ended that day at work, I was feeling totally relaxed with looking and feeling like the beautiful woman I was masquerading as, and, from my talks with the other guys, I could tell that they were experiencing the same feelings as I was. We laughed, well, giggled, actually, at almost everything, and I actually caught myself flirting with a couple of, guys who were working on the loading dock. They started to come over to us to talk, I guess, but, just then, Ms. Smith came back out and asked us all to come back inside for the final part of orientation. I gave the guys a smile, and so did the other girls, and we all headed back inside. We filed into the orientation room and sat down, and Ms. Smith started to speak. Well, girls, you have gone through your first couple of days as women. From the looks of things, you are all feeling very at ease and comfortable with your new looks. Any questions? She asked. I spoke up since we had decided that I would be the spokesperson for our little group. Yes, Ms. Smith, I have a couple of questions. Number 1 is, when we take these suits off, what happens to us? I mean, the training that was on those tapes was very thorough, and I don't necessarily want to act like a woman when I don't look like one. Number 2, how long can these suits be worn before they become too uncomfortable or, for whatever reason, have to be taken off? And number 3, is there any danger of us getting trapped in these things? She gave me one of those looks like I had seen Carrie give me once in a while since this whole thing began, and said, "Those are excellent questions, Ginny, and I am glad you have asked them." I had planned to go into these explanations anyway. She sat down with us, and it seemed to me that she was trying to be friendly and, well, almost condescending at the same time. She then continued, saying, when you take these suits off, which you will probably do for the first time on this coming Saturday, you will find that all of the temporary characteristics that you have acquired since putting them on will fade into the back of your minds and should not come to the fore again until you put the suits back on. The programming is keyed to your appearances, and when you put the suit back on and look into any mirror, the programming will reassert itself. Oh, there may be some very minor disorientation this first time when you remove the suit because of the length of time you will have been wearing it, but it will be very minor, I assure you. Your second question is not quite so easy to answer since these particular suits are the newest things available. According to all of our research and development people, you should be able to wear these suits indefinitely without discomfort and, unless there is a valid medical reason for removal of the suit, you could, theoretically and, if you wanted to, wear these suits 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life. All that is ever needed as far as maintenance is concerned is to just bathe or shower regularly. As a matter of fact, I have been wearing this one for almost a month solid now and I feel just fine. I even think that, as I wear the suit, it seems to gain more natural feeling as regards tactile senses. Now, I have to stop here for a second and tell you about the reactions of all us girls at this revelation of Ms. Smith because they are worth mentioning. Every one of us had our mouths hanging wide open, looking like fly traps with lipstick around the edges of them. I definitely recall hearing gasping sounds coming from at least 3 of us, and I also remember hearing things like "in a way," and "well, I'll be damned," and other expressions of disbelief. It took a moment for me to, A, catch my breath and, B, find my voice. When I did, a lot of gibberish spewed out of my mouth until my brain caught up and slowed me down. The first thing I said that made any sense at all sounded like, "you." But, that's what the? Yeah, I know. That doesn't sound like anything intelligent, but it was the best I could do at the time. I mean, we were all shocked and confused and jabbering like a bunch of, gulp, women. Well, after all that died down a little bit, Ms. Smith stood up and put her hands up to the back of her head and we all heard a rear-ripping noise like Velcro makes when you pull it apart. She pulled at the back of her head and her face changed. It got, weird looking like she was taking off a mask which, as it turned out, she was. In a few seconds she had enough of the face pulled off her head that we could see who it really was. It was Mr. Franklin. The guy who had hired me. "That's right, gals," he said. "I'm the fella who hired you all. The only time in the last month that I have had this bodysuit off was the day I interviewed and hired you. The rest of the time I have spent as Ms. Smith, so I can reassure you that the wear time for those suits that you have on is as advertised. When I did take this suit off for the one day, I experienced no bleed over from the programming at all. He, whoever it was, then pulled the false face and hair back up around her head and resealed it, and in just as long as it takes to tell it, there was Ms. Smith again, smiling at us. She then carried on as if nothing at all out of the ordinary had happened. As to your third question, can you get trapped in those suits? Not as far as I know and not as far as our R&D people can predict. As you can guess, though, your suits are just a bit more advanced than the one I am wearing and we don't have all the test data back yet, but all indications seem to point to the fact that those suits will come off as easily as they went on. Now I do have one word of caution. If you should ever be completely doused in very hot water, say about 140 degrees or so, you must take the suit off before you dry off. If you don't, then there is a chemical reaction that takes place and the material of the suit bonds with whatever is inside it at the time it dries, and, as far as we can tell, it would become inseparable from your own skin. In fact, it would be your new skin. That's the only warning I know of at this time, and it seems a remote possibility, so I wouldn't worry about it. Any other questions? Well, I couldn't think of anything else right then, and even if I could have, I doubt I could have vocalized it. Ms. Smith took our silence as an indication that we had no more to ask and got up to leave. Okay, ladies. If that's all, I will expect to see you all back here bright and early tomorrow morning for your first real delivery runs. Since you 5 have stuck with it up to this point with no complaints and seem to be willing to carry on with this experiment, I am authorized to tell you that, in with your first paycheck, there will be a bonus of 100 shares of company stock worth, right now about $10 a share. I don't expect you to sell them, but if you want to, you cannot until you have held them for a year or more from their issuing date. We can hold them for you in the company vaults or you can store them in your own safe deposit boxes at your bank of choice. Congratulations and, on behalf of the company and all the investors, thank you all for your courage and commitment. We are breaking new ground here, and there is no telling where we can go from here." Then she shook our hands and left the room, looking for all the world to be a gorgeous female and moving like one. We sat around and I guess we were all gathering our thoughts because nobody said anything for several minutes. Carl/Carla finally said, in a subdued tone of voice, "Wow. That was certainly an eye-opener. I never would have guessed that she was him, I mean that he was, that miss." And he just sort of petered out at that point with an amazed look on her face. I guess, at this point I should refer to everyone as the gender they looked like at the time. It'd make things easier. No one else spoke up, so I finally said, "Well, we might as well head for home, or do any of you want to go out for a drink? I think I could use one after what we just saw and heard. Also, in case you missed it, each of us is gonna get a $1,000 bonus in our first checks. What do you say, Jerry, Dana, Carla, Terry? Feel like a little celebration drink? There's a nice-looking little place just down the street from that restaurant across the street from here. I noticed it when we were coming in to work this morning. Maybe we could get something to eat there as well." It's an indication of how well the programming on those tapes had worked on us, because with the exception of Dana, all the rest of the girls agreed with me. Dana said she had to get back home and talk this whole thing over again with her girlfriend, so she couldn't join us this time, but she promised that she would go with us the very next time. We did the female kiss thing goodbye and headed out to our cars. We paraded out of the parking lot and Dana went her way and the rest of us drove down the street to a little place called the Stumble Inn. Yeah, I know. Cutsy name, but it actually looked like a chic little place, so we parked out front and went in to check it out. I guess we must have beaten the supper crowds because the place was pretty empty when we walked in. A cute little brunette waitress greeted us and said, "Good evening, ladies. Table for 4? I looked around and noticed that the place was nicely decorated and there were also no seedy-looking drunks passed out at the bar, always a plus for an inn, in my opinion, and answered, "Yes, that'll be just fine." She took us over to a secluded table and, after we were all seated, took our drink orders and left us menus saying she would be right back with our drinks and to take our dinner orders. Well, I thought, so far, so good. The place looks clean and respectable, there are no stains on the menus or the tablecloths, and the waitress is friendly. We sat and talked a bit and perused the menus, and in a few minutes, she was back with our drinks. She placed them on the table and whipped out an order pad and asked if we were ready to order. When we had finished ordering, she gathered up the menus and started to move away from the table, but stopped and turned back towards us and asked, "Are you ladies working at that new delivery place up the street? I've never seen any of you before and I know they are just starting up." We replied in the affirmative and she continued, "Do you know if there are any more openings there? My husband has been out of work for almost 2 months and we are getting kind of desperate, money-wise. He was a driver for another delivery firm that went out of business and I am sure he would fit right in at that new place." We all damn near lost it at that point and I made a show out of taking a sip of my drink before I answered her. "Well, honey," I said, "I will ask at the office up there and see if they need any more people, but don't get your hopes up. I have no idea if they are going to be hiring anyone else, for a little while at least." I managed to get that out without strangling on my own laughter and without laughing in that poor girl's face. I could picture her hubby in one of these bodysuits, and the more I pictured it, the more I had to laugh, until I couldn't hold it back anymore, and I just burst out in a full belly laugh which, by the way, sounded very weird in my female voice. At that point, all bets were off and the other 3 at the table broke up as well, and for a few minutes we were all just shrieking with laughter and had tears rolling down our cheeks. When I could see again, I noticed that poor girl had an angry look on her face and I realized that she must have thought we were laughing at her. Before she could say anything I held up my hand, palm towards her and, through my giggling, I said, "Please, honey, don't be mad. We aren't laughing at you. It has been rough getting trained up there and today was the final training. We are all just so relieved that it's finally over and we will be really starting work tomorrow that we decided to stop here and celebrate, and I'm afraid we got a bit carried away for a second there. Please forgive us." The angry look slowly left her face to be replaced by a questioning, "I'm not sure" look, and she turned and walked away to place our orders. I elbowed Jerry, who was sitting next to me in the booth, and I said, "We have to leave her a really nice tip to all of the girls. She'll remember us now, and if we ever have to come in here again, she will treat us better if we tip well and leave her with a good taste in her mouth about us." Okay, bad choice of words, but that set everyone off again, and it was one of those things where whatever was said was funny, even if it wasn't, and we were just recovering, finally, when the waitress came back with our food. She set the food down on the table and took our mysteriously empty drink glasses. I didn't remember drinking mine, but, then, I didn't remember much of the last 15 or 20 minutes. I had been laughing too hard and having too much fun with the other girls. We reordered drinks, going with a light wine this time since we were going to have to drive when we left here, and I took the opportunity to reassure the waitress, Betty was her name, that we were really sorry if it had seemed that we had been laughing at her. She smiled a little bit and said it was okay and left us to enjoy our dinner. The food was very good and Betty's service couldn't have been better. We all had a good time that afternoon/evening, and, all too soon the time had come to part company until the next morning. We left Betty a really good tip, about $35 altogether, and paid our bill and left the inn, promising to come back again, and we meant it too. Then we all went to our cars and headed our separate ways home. On the way home, I did a lot of thinking about where I was and what I was doing. Okay, I'm out on the West Coast, California. Sunshine, movie stars, beach bunnies. What could be wrong with that? Well, let's see. The first thing that comes to mind is, I look like one of the beach bunnies. Now I want you all to understand where my mind was at this particular time. I was thinking, acting, sounding, and moving like a real woman. My responses became more feminine with every hour I spent inside this bodysuit, but I didn't feel weird about it or concerned at all. Instead, I felt relaxed, happy, and well, feminine. I remember thinking, boy, if they ever patent the programming they used on me and the others, they'll make a fortune to go with the fortune they are gonna make by selling these bodysuits. And then it hit me. Wait one damned minute here. That thought came slamming into my brain like a runaway freight train. I had to pull over to the side of the expressway, or I would have lost control of the car for sure. I just sat there shaking for a few minutes, trying to work through that thought, but I knew I wasn't gonna work it out just sitting here at the side of the road. Besides, some cop could come along and I had no ID that would match the way I looked. So I pulled back onto the roadway and cautiously made my way back to Carrie's apartment. When I got there, I parked in the lot and practically ran up to the apt, unlocked the door and slammed it closed behind me. I threw my purse in the direction of the couch, kicked my high heels into the corner of the room and flung myself into the easy chair. I sat there, halfway angry and halfway scared for about 2 hours or so, trying to figure out what the hell was going on here and why Carrie had been lying to me. He had to have been lying, after all. Nobody would go to this much trouble to set up a delivery service. There had to be another reason, but what could it be? I got up from the easy chair and began pacing around the room. Sometimes that helps me think, but this time I came up with nothing. I was going to have more information before any of this would make sense. I also realized that I wasn't going to be able to talk to Carrie about any of my suspicions until I knew where he stood in all of this. I knew also that I would have to clue in the other girls, unless they had already reached the same conclusions I had. Could this be some kind of government thing? Or maybe some big business secret? Or maybe... oh my God. Could this be an espionage kind of? And with that thought, my mind spun off into several fantastic and, to the best of my knowledge then, ridiculous scenarios. The next time I looked at the clock, it was 9:45 p.m. and I was no closer to figuring anything out than I had been out there on the road when the idea had first hit me, and Carrie still wasn't home. I took a quick shower and went to bed, my mind reeling with thoughts of government conspiracies, and spy agencies and big business plots. The one thing I definitely knew for sure was that the next few days at work were going to be nerve-wracking and very, very interesting. Tuesday morning. I awoke the next morning after a very sleepless night. My body had been tired enough to sleep, but my mind just wouldn't go into shutdown mode. It kept going over and over different scenarios that would offer some explanation for all the weirdness that was going on. I mean, you've got 5 guys who have nothing in common, really, wearing bodysuits that make them look like incredibly hot women. You have programming tapes that fill up their heads with all the knowledge required to act, move, and react like the women they appear to be. You even have the liquid that changes their voices so they sound like women. What in the hell could the reason behind this actually be? I could hear Carrie's snores coming from behind his bedroom door, so I must have fallen asleep at some point during the night, or I would have remembered hearing him come in. Yeah, I had a lot of questions for him, too, but I had to be careful. I didn't want to give the fact that I had tumbled to whatever scheme was going on to Carrie. I had to play this very close to the vest, as card players say, because I had a feeling that, whatever was behind this elaborate scheme, it wouldn't be real healthy for me or the other girls if it became known that we knew something was going on. I wondered, briefly, about letting the other girls know what I had figured out, thinking that they might not be able to keep a secret, that they might panic when confronted by the thought of some nefarious plot perpetrated by God only knew who. With those thoughts running through my tired mind, I got up and did my morning ablutions. You know, shower, powder, makeup, all the things every girl does every morning. Take a drink of the voice changer and put the bottle in my purse, just in case. Then I dressed in another of the provided uniforms, this one an ivory top and a very short light brown skirt with the appropriate lacy underthings. Then I brushed out my long red hair until it shone and did a little styling with a curling iron. When I was satisfied with how I looked, I went into the kitchen to fix something to eat. I debated with myself as to whether I ought to wake Carrie up, and I decided to let him sleep. I wasn't sure I could maintain a dumb act with him, and I didn't know how I should or could, if I felt I should, bring up my suspicions and discuss my concerns with him. I had to know more about what might be going on and what Carrie's role in all of it, if any, was. So I fixed myself a quiet breakfast of fruit and juice. I sat there, eating and thinking, for about 20 minutes before I decided that I could probably think clearer away from the apartment, so I finished up, took care of the dishes, put on my 3-inch work heels, grabbed my keys and my purse and went down to get into my car. As I drove into work that morning, I tried to keep my mind on my driving. Although we had gotten our new ID papers yesterday, including a California driver's license with our new names on them, I wasn't anxious to test them out if some overzealous public servant, namely a cop, decided that I wasn't driving up to California standards. So I took it easy, staying with traffic but not making waves, if you know what I mean. I arrived at work about a half hour early and parked in the lot. I saw that Jerry's and Carla's cars were already there and, after I locked my car, I walked across the street for a quick cup of coffee before beginning work. When I walked into the little diner across the street, I saw Jerry and Carla sitting in a booth, and I walked over and sat down with them. I ordered a cup of coffee when the waitress came over, and after she left, the 3 of us talked for a bit about what we would be doing that day and how it would be to actually deliver stuff looking and acting like lovely women. We talked a bit about what it would be like to get hit on by guys and how we might handle that, and just generally sounded like 3 working girls talking about their new jobs. I wondered about bringing up my suspicions, but I decided to wait until all 5 of us could be together. After about 15 minutes or so, we finished our coffees and headed back across the street to go to work. We went in the main doors and went to the dispatcher's office to get our keys and route sheets. We met Terry and Dana there, and, for a few minutes, it sounded just like every other group of excited women I had ever heard. Little squeals of excitement and oohs and ahs over who got which route and what part of the city, and everyone complimenting everyone else on how well their uniforms fit them and how pretty we all looked. We had all seen the ads on billboards about AG deliveries on the way to work. I thought, wow, whoever is behind this, they sure do work fast. I hadn't seen any billboards on the way home yesterday. Then, the most curious thing happened. The very second I got my route assignment, something went click in my head, and instead of thinking about the conspiracy, I found myself walking over to a mirror and, when I got there, I checked my makeup and jewelry. My thoughts were, all of a sudden, focused on how I looked in the streets I would have to drive and the offices I would be delivering to. I didn't think anything about it at the time. It was only later, after I found out what this whole thing was all about, that I remembered what I am telling you now. I remember walking out to my delivery van, which was already loaded with all the things I would be delivering that day, and, along with the other girls, we all mounted up and headed out on our respective routes. I don't remember the specifics of that first day at all. I vaguely remember making deliveries and flirting with men in the offices, but it's all vague and hazy in my mind, even now. The next thing I clearly remember, I was pulling my empty van into the parking lot at AG. My route book was filled out and showed every delivery I had made along with how much I had collected in fees and tips. It came to over $1,500 in fees and over $200 in tips. I found myself walking back to the dispatcher's office, and when I got there, I turned over all the cash and checks I had gotten from the places I had delivered to. Then I turned over my tips and the dispatcher said, "Don't worry about your tip money, Ginny, you'll get it all back before you leave today. We just want to document it and count it so we have an idea of how much the customers appreciate the new service. Plus, this was an easy day since it's the first on the routes for all you new girls. As time goes on, the workload will get heavier and the fees and tips should grow commensurately. Hell, girl, you could be bringing home over $3,000 a day by the end of the week and taking home $400 to $600 in tips." That sounded like one hell of a lot of money to me, and I couldn't imagine what we were delivering that would garner that much money. But, like I said earlier, I wasn't thinking really clearly right then, and it wasn't until I was punching out at the time clock that my mind got totally clear again. Even then, I couldn't recall details of my day, and after I punched out, I went into the break room to get a cold drink and try to figure things out. I bought a cold soda from one of the machines there and sat down to quench my thirst and to think. Terry and Dana came in right about then, and I could see that they had sorta puzzled looks on their faces as well. They each got something to drink and then sat down at the table with me. We didn't talk much, but rather just kinda sat there, each of us thinking our own private thoughts, I guess. After a few more minutes, Jerry and Carla came in, and they too had those puzzled looks on their faces. We all sat there without talking for a few more minutes until Ms. Smith came into the room. She was all smiles and really elated at seeing us all there and began to speak to us. "Girls, what a wonderful first day you had. Do you realize that, together, you brought in almost $10,000 in fees and almost $1,200 in tips? And this was an easy day. Just imagine how much you will be making by the end of this week alone, let alone the weeks to come." She was almost hugging herself in excitement, and we all just stared at her in amazement. Then, and I do remember this, although I apparently wasn't supposed to, she said, "Rumble seat," in a very clear voice, and, all of a sudden, the details of the entire day came rushing into my mind. I could recall every delivery, every time I flirted with some guy, and every moment of the day right up to, and including, what I had for lunch. I thought, now that's really strange. How come I couldn't remember all this just a little while ago? I pushed those thoughts back into the back of my mind for right then, though, because I didn't want to arouse any suspicions. I could think about after I got out of the building and was on my way home. I didn't see any indications on any of the other girls' faces, and that led me to believe that, incredible as it might seem, some kind of hypnosis was at work here. Oh yeah. Real suspicious. After all that stuff on those tapes, I should have been aware of that a long time before now. Well, anyway, right after that, Ms. Smith handed each of us an envelope that she told us contained our tips for the day. I opened mine right then and counted it, and it was correct, $255. The other girls counted theirs as well, and they all verified that the amounts were correct. We left and went to our cars, Jerry, Terry, Carla and Dana talking excitedly about how much they had made in just one day. I was very quiet, and Dana asked me what was wrong. I said something about just being a little tired, and I was sure I would be fine the next morning. We parted company in the parking lot and got into our cars for the trip home, saying all the things women say when they part after a day at work and doing those little finger wiggle waves at each other. I sat down in my car and just sat there for a moment trying to think all this out. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that something was rotten in the state of Denmark, as my dad used to say, meaning that there was something very wrong with this whole setup. I had to find the answer, and something was telling me I had to find it quick. I was beginning to think that if I got into this thing too deeply, I might never get out. I stopped at a little bar on the way home. I couldn't think clearly while driving, and I had to try and get some things straight in my mind. It ought to tell you what frame of mind I was, because I completely forgot about how I looked right now. I walked into that place and it seemed like time just stopped for a couple of seconds. Every male head in that bar turned towards the door when I entered, and I could actually feel the weight of every eye on me. If I had been a real woman at that point in time, I probably could have smelled the testosterone beginning to permeate the air in there. I started to turn around and leave, but I really needed a drink, and I thought, well, okay. This bar is full of guys and they are all looking at me like a starving man looks at a cut of rare prime rib, but I can handle this. After all, I am a guy, no matter how I look and act. There's no way I can get in any trouble if I just get a drink and sit by myself and think for a few minutes. Ever hear that phrase that was popular at the time, yeah right? Oh, brother, was I ever wrong. Inside of 2 minutes of my entering that bar, I had 5 guys practically hanging off my neck, all wanting to buy me a drink or saying things like, "You look lonesome, baby, how's about you and me getting to know each other better," and even, "You, what's your sign?" Well, I finished my first drink, but before I could even put the glass down on the table I had sat down at, 4 or 5 more drinks were almost pushed into my face by 4 or 5 different guys. One guy even had a cigarette lighter out and lit as if he were giving me a light, and I didn't even have a cigarette. Just then, I heard a voice over the din of conversation, and it said, "Hey guys. Why don't you leave the little lady alone? The way you are all crowding around her, she probably can't even breathe." It was a deep and pleasant voice, but I could hear the all too apparent sound of command in it. It sounded like a voice that would belong to a politician. The guys crowding around me kind of straightened up, and I could hear an intake of breath from more than one of them as they turned to look over their shoulders at this intruder on their hunting grounds. When the guys part a little ways, I could see the individual who had spoken. He was sitting at the bar, and I wondered why I hadn't seen him when I first came in. He was tall, though I couldn't tell just how tall since he was seated. He had dark brown hair and was very rugged looking, but not ugly. You know the kind of guy I mean. Sort of like Stacy Keach in that Mike Hammer TV show a few years back. For a minute it was very quiet in the bar, and then one of the guys around me said, "Hey pal, why don't you mind your own damned business? This lady," and I could almost hear the quotes, "came in here looking for a little fun and we intend to oblige her, don't we guys?" I could hear a murmur of assent from the other men around me, and I figured I'd better think quick or there's gonna be trouble here. Working out the odds, I thought that 1-to-1 would be better than 4 or 5-to-1, and I stood up and waved gaily at the guy at the bar, calling out to him, "Well, hello, darling. I was wondering when you would get here. All these nice gentlemen were keeping me from getting lonely. Wasn't that nice of them?" I got up quickly and headed for the bar, swinging my hips for all I was worth. I remember thinking, okay, if I can make it to the bar without one of these guys stopping me, then I can run out the door and be in my car before any of these guys can make it to the door. Well, I made it to the bar okay, but something made me stop and greet the fella at the bar like he was a long-lost friend or, gulp, lover. I put it down to self-preservation just then, but later I realized that somehow I had to have known that this guy was someone who would be able to help me out of more than just this situation. I bent down and kissed him lightly on the cheek and whispered, "Please help me get out of here." He looked in my eyes, and he must have seen the desperation in them, because he reached out with both arms and hugged me, saying in a loud enough voice to be heard all over the bar, "You got yourself in too deep again, didn't you, honey?" He looked at those men again and said, "Fellas, this is my girlfriend Nancy. We were supposed to meet here at this time, but she just can't resist flirting a little bit with every guy she sees. I love her madly, but sometimes she gets in over her head. She didn't mean anything, fellas, and just to show you that my heart is in the right place, I am gonna buy a round for the house." He turned to the bartender and told him to set him up and tossed a $50 bill on the bar. In that loud voice again, he said, "Use that until it's gone." Then he stood up, put his arm around my waist and pulled me in close to him and, yikes, kissed me. I mean kissed. Not your glad to see us sweetie where we go into supper at kind of kiss, but a full on the lips, mouth-parted man-to-woman kiss. I started to struggle, but then I realized that if I did, it might ruin the illusion that we were boy and girl friends, so I just closed my eyes and went with it. I guess it must have been the programming on those tapes that kicked in, but, after a second or so, I began to respond to that kiss. My mouth opened all by itself and I felt his tongue gently begin to search around in my mouth. I began to get a little short of breath and I pushed gently at his chest. He broke the contact between our lips and looked deeply into my eyes and I could see a question there. I whispered, "Please just help me get out of here before I get gang raped by those Neanderthals over there. I have my car right outside and I can get away before they can figure out what happened. I'll give you back your $50, but I gotta get out of here." He winked at me and seemed to understand because he stood up and said, "Okay, Nancy. I forgive you, again, but one of these days I am gonna leave you in whatever mess you get yourself into." He grabbed my hand and led me out of that bar. The second we were outside, I breathed a sigh of relief and reached in my purse for my car keys. My fingers also located the envelope with my tips in it and I fished it out, opened it up and pulled out $50. I looked up at him. Now that he was standing up I could see that he was tall. About 6 feet 3 inches and he looked to weigh in at about a solid 230 pounds, and I do mean solid. He took the $50 but kept hold of my hand and said, "Okay doll, what was that all about?" and he jerked his head in the direction of the bar. "You know, you are gonna get yourself in a lot of trouble jerking guys around like you did in there. Maybe the next time there won't be somebody like me to rescue you." I desperately wanted away from there and I was half afraid he would kiss me again and half afraid he wouldn't. Somewhere in the back of my mind, though, I could hear Jim yelling at me and I realized that it had to be the programming that was making me act like this. Ginny had been in charge for the past several minutes and Jim wanted back at the reins of this runaway stagecoach. I made an effort to push the Ginny part of me into the background and I was partly successful. All of a sudden I felt revolted that this man had kissed me and I had enjoyed it. My face must have betrayed my revulsion because he suddenly got angry and said, "Hey. I'm not that bad, am I? I mean, you seemed to enjoy my kiss back in there," and I thought, well, you know, that we might have made some kind of connection of something. He looked really disappointed and I thought quickly and said, "No, it isn't that you're bad looking or anything like that. I just realized what could have happened to me in there and it made me a little queasy is all. Really, thank you for rescuing me from that pack of hyenas in there. If you hadn't come along I don't know how I would have ever gotten out of there." I laid it on pretty thick, playing the part of the helpless female. He smiled at me then and I could see that it had worked, at least partly. He looked around and then he said, "Listen, my name is Joe Parsons. My friends call me Joey. My enemies call me sir, if they call me at all." He smiled at that and laughed a short little laugh. "Just kidding, honey, trying to break through the tension here. My name really is Joe Parsons though. I'm a private investigator and a pretty good one if I do say so myself. I just finished a case today and I had stopped here for a drink on my way back to my office to write up my report and a bill for my client. What do you say we get out of here before that bunch of velociraptors comes out here looking for you?" I didn't really want to go anywhere with this guy, but then I thought, if he's really a private investigator and he is as good as he thinks he is, maybe he can help me with this thing I have gotten myself into with AG deliveries, so I said, "Okay, Joe, my name is Ginny. How about you lead the way to your office and I'll follow you in my car? That way I don't have to come back here to get it and risk running into any of that bunch inside, again. Sound okay to you?" He showed me that smile again and said, "Okay, Ginny, that sounds good to me." Joe walked to his car, a rather nondescript-looking 3-year-old Chevy, and I went to my car. He waited until I was ready before he pulled out of his parking spot and I followed him for several blocks, thinking all the while, this is a stroke of real luck. If I can convince this guy that my story is real and get him to help me, I just might get out of this with a whole skin. 2 of them in fact, if I can hang on to this bodysuit after it's all over. The only thing is, can I get him to help me even if he does believe me? Tuesday evening. I followed Joe into an underground parking garage with an attendant at the entrance. Joe stopped and talked to the attendant for a minute and then pointed back at me in my car. The guy smiled and waved at me, and I followed Joe into the garage. When we parked side by side in a couple of spaces and I got out of the car, Joe got out of his car and came over to me. He took my hand and led me towards a corner of the garage where, I saw, there was an elevator. He was making small talk all the way over to the elevator. Nothing of any moment or meaning, just the kind of things a guy says to a girl he's just met and he wants to put her at her ease. We got in the elevator and rode it up into the 12-story building to the top floor where there was one of those pull-up doors like in Highlander, the TV show. He pulled the door up and I could see a large wide open apartment. He reached over to the wall just inside the door and flipped a light switch, and a soft white glow lit up the place. I looked around and saw that it was well but sparsely furnished. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the place where there was a sunken living room area. There were no walls, per se, only dividers here and there to break up the wide expanse of floor space. I looked at Joe and saw that he had been watching me, gauging my response to his home. It was an impressive place, and I also saw a full-sized pool table in one area. There was a wide spiral staircase leading up to what I assumed to be the bedroom, which hung out over the living room area. A nice stereo/TV/VCR/DVD complex was located on one side of the living room, and there was a huge, open kitchen space with one of those big restaurant-type refrigerators and a bunch of pots and pans hung over a food preparation area. All in all, a very nice, masculine home. Over by the elevator there was something covered up by a tarp. I asked Joe about it and he got a big smile on his face. He walked over to it and said, "This is my pride and joy. I have worked on this thing for 2 years, getting it rebuilt and modified just the way I wanted it." He pulled the tarp away with a flourish, and there, under the tarp, was an absolutely gorgeous, mint condition looking Vincent Black Shadow motorcycle. It sat there gleaming with reflected light, looking like some predatory beast ready to pounce on some unwary prey. It took my breath away just looking at it, and Joe, noticing that, said, "Well, now. This is a treat. A woman who appreciates a work of art when she sees one. Most gals, when I show this to them, just look at it and say something like, 'Oh, that's nice,' and immediately dismiss it as something they don't want to know about. I'm pleased that you know what it is and that you seem to like it." Now, I was not a motorcycle fanatic or anything like that, but I recognized a legendary bike when I saw one and told Joe that. "My God, Joe, who wouldn't like something like that? It is absolutely beautiful, and it shows the loving care you must have put into it. Why, there's not a spot of rust or dirt anywhere on it, and even a girl like me can see that you have done some major modifications on it." His face seemed to light up as I said that, and I could tell that Joe had a real soft spot for this great, vintage motorcycle. He gently maneuvered the tarp back into place over that lovely bike and took my hand and led me into the kitchen area where he opened a cupboard and brought out 2 wine glasses. Then he located a bottle of wine and poured us both a glass. I looked at Joe over the rim of the glass and said, "Joe? I thought we were going back to your office. Why are we at your apartment?" "Well, Ginny," he replied, "my home is my office. See, I think that an office is such an impersonal place to talk to anyone, and I like to have my clients come here so they can be comfortable and relaxed. I have found that clients are much more at ease and I get more useful information from them, and I think it's one of the big reasons I have been successful." "More wine, Ginny?" When he asked me that, I glanced at my glass and saw that it was empty. I didn't even remember drinking it. I immediately went on my guard. Knowing the effect that the bodysuit and the programming had had on me, I knew that it wouldn't take much for Ginny to take back over completely, and then I would be in some serious trouble. Even though I knew that the bodysuit would allow me to actually have sex with a man, there was absolutely no way I wanted to ever do that. Considering all the programming that was on those tapes though, I would be willing to bet that it wouldn't take much for me so slip, and, also knowing the effect that Joe's kiss had on me, well, it was just as well for what might be left of my poor abused male ego to be on alert. Joe poured me another glass of wine and then he showed me to the living room. There were two very large and comfy-looking couches there along with a couple of well-worn and comfortable-looking easy chairs. I sat in one of the chairs and I noticed a brief look of disappointment on Joe's face. I knew he would have liked me to choose one of the couches so he could sit beside me. I couldn't allow that though. I couldn't lie to Joe either, although it was gonna be tough telling him my story since he had kissed me. I knew that he was looking for more than just a kiss, but he wasn't going to get it. We made small talk for more than an hour while I sipped that second glass of wine. I figured to drive home soon and I didn't want to be even mildly under the influence of alcohol when I did. He told me quite a bit about himself and his business. It turned out that he was quite successful as a private investigator, having handled and solved some of the toughest cases LA had seen, including a kidnapping involving a very rich family's daughter. He had not only gotten her back alive and well, but had also killed two of the kidnappers with his bare hands. The family had been very grateful and had not only paid his fee, but had also bought the Vincent for him and paid for all the parts and other things he had done to it. In addition, Joe's apartment building had been owned by the family and they had signed it over to Joe, so he not only lived there now, rent-free, but had the additional income from the other apartments. I looked at my watch and, as if just noticing the time, I exclaimed, "Oh my God, look at the time. I am gonna be late and my roommate will have a fit. Joe, I am so sorry, but I have to leave. This has been interesting and I would like to know more about you. Maybe we could have dinner sometime soon?" He seemed a bit taken aback by my forwardness, but then he smiled at me and said, "You bet, Ginny, I'd like that a lot. Are you busy tomorrow night?" Well, I thought about it for a minute and then I said, "No, Joe. I'm not busy at all. Why don't we meet at a restaurant of your choice and we can have a nice dinner and talk?" Well, Joe thought that would be just great and we settled on the restaurant and then he walked me down to my car. He handed me a plastic card with his name and apartment number on it and said, "This card will allow you to leave the parking garage. Just show it to the guard at the exit and he will let you pass. Hang on to it so if you want to, you can come back here anytime even if I am not here." He also gave me one of his business cards with his home and cellular phone numbers on it, saying, "If you ever need to be rescued again, just call one of those two numbers and I'll be there before you can hang up the phone." He smiled at me again and I felt kind of flustered at having a man pay so much attention to me, but once again the programming came to the fore and almost forced me to smile back and blush a little bit. "So you are going to be my knight in shining armor?" I asked, jokingly. He replied, "Sir Joe, at your service, milady. Dragons slain at no charge other than a kiss from your sweet lips," and he gave me that damned grin again. He was a damned attractive man and I could feel my resolve weakening as the programming tried to make me react as a real woman might have. I knew, though, that if I was ever going to get his help with the mess I was in, I would have to be truthful with him, and kissing him again would just make any explanation just that much more difficult. Hell, it was gonna be hard enough just telling him that I was really a man wearing an advanced type of bodysuit. He helped me into my car looking a bit disappointed that he didn't get another kiss, but he smiled at me anyway and watched as I started the car and backed out of the parking space. I waved at him and then headed out of the garage. When I reached the exit, the guard came out and stopped me, but I showed him that plastic card that Joe had given to me and the guard smiled and waved me on out. All the way home I was trying to think of ways to present this impossibly weird tale to Joe in such a manner that he would not only believe me but would also want to help me out of it. The only way I could think of that would leave no doubt in Joe's mind about the veracity of my story was that I would have to partially remove part of the bodysuit. That would not only remove any doubts he might have about my plight but also convince him that I was not a real woman. It would be risky, yes, but I didn't see any other options left open to me. The haziness of my mind all this day had convinced me that whoever was behind this craziness was definitely not on the up and I was definitely in some danger. When I finally got home, Carrie's car was gone again and I had to wonder where he had been last night and now tonight. Sure, Carrie was a single guy, not unattractive and supposedly well off to boot, so he could be out raising hell with one beach bunny or another, but I wondered nonetheless. especially with what I now thought I knew about AG deliveries and Carrie's possible involvement with that business. It was almost 9:30 p.m. and my voice was back to normal, so I decided to cook rather than order out. An hour later, I was done eating and getting ready for bed. My mind was still going about 100 miles an hour bit. I knew I had to get some real sleep that night, so I poked around in the medicine cabinets and found some over-the-counter sleeping tablets. Following the instructions, I took 2 of them and closed and locked my bedroom door. Then I laid down in my bed and after a bit of tossing and turning, finally fell into a deep sleep. Still more to come. Wednesday morning. When I awoke, it was about a half hour before the alarm was due to go off. I laid there for a few minutes trying to get my brain working properly. I finally decided that it wasn't doing any good, just laying there, so I got up. It was very quiet and I could hear birds chirping merrily in the trees off to one side of the apartment building. Yeah, little do they know. I snorted to myself. I wasn't feeling very humorous that morning. I went into the bathroom and drew a bath. While the tub was filling, I took a long look in the full-length mirror and once again, the thought sent through my mind, what a body. Even after 4 days inside this bodysuit, every time I looked in a mirror, I was still shocked by what I saw, at least for the first few seconds. After that, it seemed like I adjusted my thinking and what I saw looking back at me seemed normal. I knew it had to be the programming from those tapes, but, knowing that didn't seem to make a difference. I began to pose in front of that mirror, kind of like how I thought a nude model would do, turning half sideways and licking my lips like a beautiful woman, winking at myself, and I remember thinking, man, am I hot. Looking back at it now, I can see that, slowly, the suit and the programming were preparing me for acceptance, but back then, I didn't see it. When the tub was full, I climbed in and once again I marveled at the feelings of this bodysuit. Every day it seemed that I could feel more and more. After 4 days of continually wearing this thing, it seemed like my regular skin. I could feel every small touch of my fingers, and every time I would pinch a bit of skin, it felt just like there was nothing on my body at all. It felt silky and smooth, just like a real woman's skin would feel. It might seem weird to you, but in all this time I had never really looked at the way I looked in this suit. I guess there had just been too much going on, what with getting used to it and then the excitement and mystery of the new job and AG deliveries. Now that I had a few extra minutes, I started really looking at the body I was now occupying. First, I examined those large breasts. Now I had seen a breast or 2 before, but I had never really had the opportunity to see a pair at this range and at my leisure. I guess the first thing I really noticed were the nipples. They were very large and kind of brown and about the size of the eraser on the end of a pencil. I touched one of them and a shiver went up and down my back as it began to grow in size. I sat straight up in the tub and a gasp escaped from my lips. I felt that. As if that nipple and the breast it was attached to were actually a part of me, and the other one was responding now as well. I began to notice, at the same time, a kind of warmth between my legs and I felt kind of, I don't know, quivery. I laid back in the tub and began an earnest exploration of these parts of my body that I hadn't paid a lot of attention to before this. Gradually I realized that I was fondling my breast and massaging between my legs and feeling very tense, but good. As I continued, the warmth grew and the feelings intensified until I was rubbing and fondling for all I was worth and moaning low and deeply in my throat. I recognized those sounds as the sounds that an aroused woman makes in the throes of sexual passion. Part of me was screaming at me to stop, this wasn't natural, but a bigger part was saying, this feels too good to be wrong. So I kept on with what I was doing. In a distracted way, I noticed that I could feel every little touch of my fingers with those long nails, on my skin. That fact registered on my brain, but that time, my hands and my body were on autopilot and I don't think I could have stopped if I had wanted to. Faster and faster, my fingers seemed to move of their own accord and I actually could feel the fingers of one hand penetrating my vagina. A feeling began to build at the base of my spine and gradually moved up my back and down my legs until I thought I would burst. I felt warmer and warmer and that feeling became all-encompassing until it seemed that every remaining vestige of my masculinity was pushed into some small corner of my mind and I felt incredibly feminine. All of a sudden, it seemed as if a dam had burst and I lost myself in what had to be a completely female orgasm. Wave after wave of pleasure chased each other up and down my body, and for a few seconds that seemed like hours, I quivered and shook and moaned in release. After things calmed down, I just laid there in the slowly cooling bath water, my mind absolutely stunned by what had just happened, but my body was tingling in what I guess is the afterglow that women talk about. I remember thinking, when I could think again, oh my God. What did I just do? I had just masturbated as a woman and, though I hate to say it, I had loved it. I had no idea that orgasms felt that way to a woman. My whole body had been involved in that orgasm and it seemed that it still was. Every once in a while, a shudder would travel the length of my body and with every one of them I felt a shadow of the larger feelings I had just a few minutes ago. Then, as if a switch had been closed, I lost all interest in what I had just been doing to myself as my male mind seemed to reassert itself. I sat straight up in the tub and I felt like I was blushing, all over. I felt ashamed at what I had just done. I quickly finished my bath and got out, wrapping a towel around my body and pulling the plug from the tub. I padded back across to my bedroom and quickly closed the door behind myself. I plopped down on the edge of the bed and tried to get myself together. What did this mean? Was I becoming so comfortable with being inside the bodysuit that it was beginning to take over from my male feelings, those that were left? I was glad that Carrie was still asleep and hadn't heard my moaning and groaning in the bathroom. I didn't think I could have faced him just then if I would have known that he had heard me in the bathroom. After a few minutes of sitting there, I glanced at the clock radio next to my bed and noticed the time. Shit. Unless I got myself together and moving, I was going to be late for work. I finished drying myself off and began to get dressed in a hurry. Putting on my bra, panties, and pantyhose, I grabbed my blouse and skirt and headed back into the bathroom to do my makeup and hair. Doing a quick but adequate job on my face and hair, I quickly finished dressing and ran out of the bathroom into the living room. I grabbed my purse, practically jumped into the heels I had worn yesterday and headed out the door. I jumped in my car and backed out into the road and took off towards LA and work. My mind was still on that incredible experience I'd had in the bathtub, but some part of my brain was paying attention to my driving, so I had no problems making it to work 10 minutes early. I parked in the lot, noticing, as I did, that everyone else was already there. I climbed out of the car, locked the door and ran into the building, managing to get punched in just in the nick of time. I peeked in the break room, but there was no one in there. I headed down the hall to the dispatch room and just managed to catch Jerry coming out with her root sheets. She looked at me and said, "Running a little late this morning, hon? Ms. Smith has all your stuff ready and waiting for you. You'd better shake a leg or a hip and get it in gear, girl." She giggled at me and headed off towards the garage. I walked into the dispatcher's office and found Ms. Smith waiting for me, root sheets in hand. She glanced up as I walked in and said, "Oh, Ginny. I am glad you made it on time. I was getting a bit worried about you. Here are your root sheets and delivery schedule for the day. You will be pretty much in a different part of town today, so we included extra maps and directions as best as we could. Now, get going, girl. Time's a-wasting." She handed me the paperwork and clipboard and turned me back around and practically pushed me out of the office. On the way out to my van, I saw Carol, the secretary I had met when I had first interviewed for this job. She smiled at me and I said, "Hi, Carol. We haven't had much of a chance to get to know one another, have we?" "No, Ginny, we haven't," she replied. "How about we get together tonight for dinner somewhere? Then we could talk and things." Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I didn't think she was interested in me at all, especially considering that I was just as pretty as she, at the moment. I started to say, "Sure, that'd be great," when it dawned on me that I had to meet Joe this evening. Damn. Just my luck. Oh well, I wouldn't have enjoyed an evening with Carol quite as much as Ginny as I would have as Jim. Still, she was awfully attractive, and as I thought that, something clicked in my head and I just said, "Maybe another time, Carol, I have plans for this evening." And I walked away. I remember getting into my van and checking my route sheets, but not much else for that whole day. The next thing I remember was parking the van back in the garage, empty, and walking back into the main building. Terry was going in just ahead of me, and we handed in our sheets and money and headed for the break room. Dana, Carla and Jerry were already sitting in there and we joined them. Ms. Smith came in and, if possible, was even more enthused than she had been yesterday. She said, "You girls are really getting into the swing of things. Together, today you brought in over $15,000 in fees and over $1,500 in tips. Oh, ladies, I think this thing is going to work out just wonderfully." She handed out the envelopes containing our tips and waited while we opened them and checked the contents. Mine contained $295. The other girls seemed pleased with their tips, and then Ms. Smith said, in a very loud tone, "Rumble seat." And again, my head cleared and I could remember every stop and every flirtation from the whole day. I tried to keep my face impassive and not let on that I had heard and understood what Ms. Smith had said. I somehow knew that if I let on that I knew about what had to be a post-hypnotic suggestion, I would be in a worse mess than I was obviously in now. After a few seconds, Ms. Smith said, "Okay, girls. That's it for today. You are all doing great and I can see terrific things in all your futures if you keep this up. Have a good night, ladies, and we'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning." Then she turned and left the room. The other girls and I talked for a few minutes and then we left the break room and headed for our cars. I looked closely at the faces of the others. They all seemed unconcerned and happy at getting so much money for what seemed to be an easy job. Dana had a thoughtful look on her face and I caught up with her and, in a quiet tone of voice, I asked her if she was okay. She looked at me and whispered, "Not here. Wait till we're out in the lot. Something is weird and I think you have noticed it too." I didn't say another word, but, once we got to our cars, and we had done the female bye-bye routine with the rest of the girls, Dana motioned at me to follow her. We got in our cars and headed out of the parking lot and I followed her to the Stumble Inn. We parked in the lot there and Dana came over to my car. I popped the lock and she got in, closing and locking the door behind her. "What's up, Dana?" "I don't know for sure, Ginny, but have you noticed that you can't seem to remember much about your day until after we are back and Ms. Smith is talking to us?" "Well, Dana, now that you mention it, I do kinda know what you mean. It seems like I am fuzzy and my thoughts are hazy until after she does her after-route pep talks. I just figured I was the only one." "Why? Are you feeling the same things as I am?" "Well, girl. Why do you think I had you follow me here instead of talking to you back at work?" Okay, Dana, take it easy. I have been noticing what you were talking about since yesterday and I didn't say anything because, well, I thought I might get in trouble or something. I was kind of playing dumb trying to draw Dana out a bit more before I told all I knew or suspected. As paranoid as I was getting, I couldn't be sure that Dana wasn't a company narc or spy. I knew something was up though, so I just kept quiet and let Dana talk. "Listen, Ginny," she said, "something is wrong over there at work. I don't know what it is, but I just know something is wrong. I'm getting scared, girl, and I don't know what to do or who to talk to. The only reason I'm talking to you is that I sorta thought I saw the same kinda puzzled look in your eyes that I have seen in mine in the mirror. I mean, this whole thing seems crazier and crazier with every day that goes by and I just know that there is a lot more going on than just a simple delivery service." Listening to Dana, I could tell that she was getting more and more upset and I tried to quiet her down. "Look, Dana, I know what you are talking about. I just don't know what we can do about it. Listen, I have kind of a date tonight with a guy I met yesterday. He might be able to help us or at least tell us what we should do about this. Do you want to come along? It might help if there are two of us telling him this crazy-sounding story. You got a date? Damn, girl, you are a fast worker. You are taking this whole girl suit thing pretty seriously, aren't you? I mean, you are a guy under there, remember? I know, Dana. This isn't a date, kind of date. I met this guy who is a private investigator and a damned good one by the looks of things. He kind of rescued me from a bad error in judgment I made last night. We talked for a while and he took me back to his place. Well, I said quickly, trying to head off her comments, it was his office and his apartment, and, oh, it's hard to explain, but I trust him and I think he might be able to help us. Are you in or what? Dana fell silent for a few seconds, apparently lost in thought. Finally she looked over at me and said, okay, Ginny, but I gotta go home and change. I am not going out anywhere looking like I just crawled out from under a car. Where and when are you meeting this guy? I told her the name of the restaurant I was supposed to meet Joe at, and the time, and I told her not to be late. I didn't want to be alone with Joe any longer than I absolutely had to. He seemed like an okay guy and I didn't want him to get his hopes up about me. Nothing could or should happen between him and me. We were both guys, for Christ's sake. I also thought it was a good idea to have Dana there because I figured that if Joe got angry when he found out I was a guy, there'd be both me and Dana to deal with. Dana said she'd be on time and she got out of my car and went back to hers. I hoped I wasn't making a mistake by including her in on this, but I was desperate and I wanted her help. I waited about 5 minutes after Dana left the parking lot before I went ahead and left. I made the drive home with no problems and parked in the lot there. I saw Carrie's car in the lot and I thought again about talking to him about my suspicions, but decided against it. I could talk to him after I met with Joe and might have a better handle on what to do to get out of this mess. I walked into the apartment and saw Carrie sitting in the living room watching TV. I stopped and talked to him for a few minutes and then I said, listen, Carrie. I would love to sit down and have a good old-fashioned bull session like we used to have in college, but I have to shower and change and get back downtown. I'm meeting someone and we're having dinner. I shouldn't be too late and if you are still up when I get back, we can yak for a while, okay? He looked out with an amused look on his face and said, gee, a date, Ginny? Who is she? Or maybe I should ask, who is he? You're really getting into this, eh? And he kind of chuckled at me. Well, I blew my top at that. Just what the hell are you talking about, Carrie? I yelled at him. I'm doing all this crap for you. You think it's been easy looking like this? I indicated my body. You think I'm enjoying all of this? Maybe you should try on one of these damn bodysuits and see what it's like to be programmed to look and act and sound like a sexy woman for a while. You know, I have just about had it with this whole thing, and if it weren't for the money and the fact that I promised you I would do this, for you, I'd tell you exactly what to do with this suit and the job and the whole damned thing. I stormed off towards the bathroom, figuring that, with that little tirade, I would have thrown Carrie off any scent he might have had about me getting suspicious. I took a quick shower and redid my hair and makeup. Then I looked through the clothes that Carrie had bought for me to use this week while I wasn't at work. I found a dress that looked like it would look good on me and I tried it on. It fit like it was made for me. I found some matching jewelry, earrings, bracelets and necklace and put them on as well. Then I found a purse that more or less matched along with some 4-inch high heels and a light wrap. I turned out the lights in the bathroom and my bedroom and walked back out into the living room. I still acted like I was angry at Carrie and I said, well? How do I look? Good enough for a special date with a her or a him? You know, Carrie, I thought we were friends, but you sit there and make fun of me? That's pretty low, my friend, and I don't like it one damned bit. Maybe we'll talk tonight when I get back and maybe we won't. Don't wait up for me. And I stormed out of the apartment. I walked rapidly to my car, listening to the tap of my heels on the pavement and feeling the swish of the dress on my legs. I gotta admit, it felt good even though it was a lot different from anything I had ever experienced before. Come to think of it, this would be the first time I had been out anywhere dressed to the teeth as a woman except for job-related times. I guess I should have been a bit nervous about that, but, somehow, I wasn't. Instead, I felt relaxed and confident that I looked good. Yep, you guessed it. That programming again. It seemed, though, that I could access my male side whenever I really wanted to, and I knew that wasn't the way it was supposed to be just by having watched the other girls at work. They seemed totally caught up in being women and showed no signs of their male selves that I had seen. on the way back into LA. I did a lot of thinking about what I was going to tell Joe. I now had no doubt that I needed his help in getting out of whatever it was I was into, and I hoped that he would help. I had a little bit of trouble finding the restaurant, but, with Joe's directions and a friendly cop, I eventually did find it. I pulled up in front of the place and a guy in a uniform came out to help me from the car and park it for me. Wow, I thought. Pretty fancy place. I walked inside and was met by a maitre d' who asked my name. I told him and that I was meeting Joe Parsons. He escorted me into the restaurant proper and seated me at a table, saying that Mr. Parsons had left instructions that whatever I wanted, I should have, and price was no object. He also said that Joe was going to be a bit detained but would be here as soon as he could. I told the maitre d' that I was expecting one other person and described Dana to him. He said he would watch for her and escort her to the table when she arrived. I said thank you, and then he called a waiter over to the table and I ordered a drink. I didn't want to get drunk tonight, but I felt I needed a little fortification for what was to come. It wasn't too much longer until I saw the maitre d' come my way, and he had a dynamite-looking dark-haired woman with him. I guess I was surprised at how good Dana looked, even though I shouldn't have been. She looked great. All dolled up and wearing an off-the-shoulder gown that left nothing about her figure in doubt. When they arrived at the table, the maitre d' seated her and called the waiter over again, and Dana ordered a drink. When the waiter left, Dana and I engaged in that female thing of telling each other how great the other looked and all that, but also giving each other looks that were worried and wondering about our situations. About 10 minutes later, I saw Joe come in. He looked in our direction and I could see a puzzled look on his face when he saw two gorgeous women sitting at the table waiting for him. He walked over to the table and stood there for a few seconds looking at me, questioning me about the presence of Dana with his eyes. I motioned for him to sit down, and when he did, I leaned over and told him that I had something to tell him and I wanted my friend here to kind of give me courage. I introduced the two of them to each other and we sat and talked until the waiter came over and took our orders. When he left, I motioned Joe and Dana to move in a little closer so I could talk without having anyone around us hear what I was saying. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, and I hoped that being in a public place would keep Joe from losing his temper. The first thing I told Joe was that Dana and I needed his help. I knew that Joe had thought he was going to have dinner and a night out with a good-looking woman, and this was the first step towards letting him down as easily as I could. We talked until dinner arrived and then took time to enjoy the meal. I could tell that Joe still had hopes, but I was going to have to squash those hopes before this evening was over. Dana hadn't said much, merely nodding once in a while to emphasize something I had said to Joe. Dinner was delicious, and when we finished, Joe suggested we go somewhere a bit quieter to talk. I asked Dana to come along and I saw a disappointed look come over Joe's face. He spoke up, saying, "Look, Ginny, I thought you and I were going to have a nice dinner and then maybe go for drinks and dancing. No offense, Dana, but even though you are a beautiful woman and under any other circumstances I would have loved to have taken you out for dinner and dancing, this was supposed to be just me and Ginny. Whatever problems you two have, can't they wait until tomorrow?" Dana finally spoke up, saying, "Look, Joe, I know you must be a bit disappointed, but Ginny and I really do need your help, and I think we should get out of here and talk about it. It's really important and we are desperate for your help." "That's true, Joe," I added. "We do need to talk about this. I'm sorry if we spoiled whatever plans you might have had for you and me tonight, but it is important that we talk about this." Okay, he said, resignedly, "I give up for now. Let's go somewhere quiet and talk. You've got my curiosity up now."
We left the restaurant at about 8:30 and, by common consent, decided that the most private place we could go was to Joe's apartment/office. We left Dana's car in the lot and she rode with me. As we followed Joe through the city streets, Dana and I firmed up our story so we wouldn't miss anything when we told Joe. We knew it was going to sound utterly unbelievable to him, but we had all the details down, and the one thing we figured would convince him, if our tale didn't, would be one or both of us removing part of the bodysuit. I only hoped, as did Dana, that we would be able to get some answers to all the questions that were racing through our minds. When we arrived at Joe's building, we followed him into the parking garage and I flashed that pass at the attendant. He waved me on through and I parked next to Joe. Then we took the elevator up to his place. Joe asked us to sit down and both Dana and I sat on one of those large couches. Joe fixed us some drinks and then sat down in an easy chair facing us. We began to tell our tale of woe, and before we were done, Joe had refreshed our drinks 3 times. He looked incredulous, but not so much as I had thought he might. I guess being a private investigator, he had seen a lot. I could tell, though, that he wasn't going to really buy our story without some kind of proof, and that meant partially removing at least one of our bodysuits. I reached behind my head, feeling around for the closure, and when I finally found it, I gripped it in both hands and gently pulled my hands apart. There was that rear-ripping sound as the Velcro or whatever it was parted. I slid my fingers inside both sides of the now open in the back mask and began to pull it forward off my face. I knew that Joe was probably going to be, at the very least, disappointed that I wasn't a real woman. I just hoped he wouldn't be so angry that he would refuse to help us. Before I got too far, though, Joe called out to me to stop. He said he didn't want to see me without the mask, and he said that he was convinced. I pulled the mask back tight around my face again and resealed it with a little help from Dana in getting the closure straight and sat back on the couch with my drink. Joe just sat there, his face had a blank look on it, and I was very afraid that we had blown it and he was going to throw us out and maybe beat me up for good measure. I mean, he had kissed me. After a few minutes of silence, Joe sighed a big sigh and looked at me. "Well," he began. "That is one hell of a tale you have told me, and, I have to confess, I thought you were either putting me on or trying to run some kind of scam on me. Seeing you start to take off that whatever it is that you are wearing convinced me though. It is a bit unsettling to know that I kissed a guy, though, and I am a bit put out that you tried to fool me like that." I could see that he was angry and embarrassed, and I tried to reassure him by saying that the way I had acted was part and parcel of the way the programming on those tapes had made me act, and also, I said, if I had told him that I wasn't a woman, back at that bar, he probably would have left me to the tender mercies of that bunch of half-drunk and horny guys there. He said that he guessed he understood that part, but I could see a kind of sad look come over his face. He looked at me and then past me at the wall and didn't say or do anything for several seconds. Then, he looked back at me and smiled a sheepish-looking smile and said, "Well, ordinarily I don't take a case without a retainer, but this thing seems so weird and outlandish that I think I will look into it." Dana and I were so happy that we actually squealed and both began talking at the same time to Joe, babbling about how grateful we were and how we really were thankful that he had believed us. He listened to the both of us for a couple of minutes and then held up his hand as he kind of chuckled. "From the sound of you two and the way you are acting, I have to see those tapes you talked about. They must be really something if they can make 2 guys sound and act like 2 excited women." Dana and I looked at each other and then back at Joe. "I don't know if you should look at those tapes, Joe," I said. "I don't want you to start acting like this." "Well, Ginny, if they are what I suspect they are, from your description of how they worked, I think they need a trigger to make the programming work on a person. In this case it is probably the bodysuit. If I am not wearing one, I don't think the tapes will affect me. I will take precautions though, and I will only view about 5 or 6 minutes of any one tape at any one time. Just in case I am wrong about the trigger for the post-hypnotic suggestions, I don't want to be swishing all over the place either." We spent another hour or so talking and planning strategy, and then Dana said, "Hey, we gotta go. If we stick around much longer we won't be getting home until way late, and I don't want to be late for work tomorrow morning." We finalized our plans and told Joe that we would bring him the tapes tomorrow. Then Dana and I got up to leave. Joe gave me that funny look again. It was a kind of a sad look, and I knew that he was wishing that I was a real woman. I had felt something from him these last couple of days, and I knew that he was hoping for some kind of a relationship with a Ginny. To tell the truth, with the way the programming made me act and feel, I was almost hoping for the same thing. With that somewhat scary thought echoing around in my mind, Dana and I went to the elevator and got in. Joe was still sitting in the easy chair, a kind of half smile on his face. Then he jumped up and ran over and got in with us, saying he wanted to walk us to my car, just for safety's sake. On the ride down to the garage, he kept looking at me as if searching my face for something. You know, he said, those bodysuits are really amazing. Maybe after all this is over I might have to look into getting one to use in my work. It could be a big asset to me to have a perfect disguise to wear when I am trailing someone. I told him, if this works out and you get us out of this, you can have this one. I don't think I will ever want to see it again. This has just been too weird for me. I can't wait for Saturday so I can climb out of this thing and be me again for a while. I have almost forgotten what I really look like under here. The elevator finally reached the garage level and the doors opened. We got out and headed for my car and Joe walked us all the way there. He stopped me before we reached my car though and said that Dana should go on ahead. He wanted to talk to me privately for a second. I gave my keys to Dana and asked her to wait in the car for me and she agreed to do so. When she walked away, Joe took me by the elbow and led me behind a support pillar and, once we were out of sight of Dana, he grabbed me and pulled me to him and kissed me. I tried to pull away but he was stronger than I was and part of me didn't want to pull away. I was actually beginning to enjoy that kiss when he stopped and pulled his face an inch or so away from mine. Then he said, "Look, Ginny or Jim or whoever you really are. I don't know what is happening to me and right now I don't want to know. I only know this. Ever since I saw you at that bar I have been falling for you. I know, you say that under that suit you are a guy, but you know what? I don't care. You are the most gorgeous woman I have ever seen and all I can think about is getting you between the sheets for some serious sex. I don't know what this makes me, whether I am turning gay or what, but I can't think about anything else. Look, don't say anything, as if I could. I gotta think this out tonight and when I see you tomorrow to get those tapes from you, we can talk more about this. It's crazy, I know." And he turned away from me. I could almost see the tenseness in his body and I swear I saw his shoulders shake a time or two as if he were crying. I was speechless. I mean I didn't have a clue as to what I should do or say or if I should do or say anything. I mumbled something like, oh, okay, Joe. And fled for my car. I didn't look back until I got there and when I did look back, it was just in time to catch Joe entering the elevator. He looked at me across the garage and I swear I could see tears in his eyes, even from where I was. I started the car and peeled out of that garage like I was trying to set a record. Dana kept asking me, "What's wrong?" All the way back to the restaurant where we had left her car, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My brain was an absolute chaos of thoughts and none of them were making any sense. I dropped Dana off at her car and I still hadn't said anything. I finally managed to say, "It's nothing. Just drop it for now and maybe tomorrow morning I'll be able to tell you." She looked at me and I could tell she wanted to know more, but I just closed the door after she got out, waved at her and left the parking lot. All the way home my mind kept replaying that kiss and what Joe had said. My God. Came the thought. Could it actually be that Joe was falling in love with Ginny? But, I am a guy. Joe can't be falling for me, I am a guy. But another part of my mind was saying, gee, I really enjoyed being held and kissed by a strong handsome guy like Joe, and, to tell the truth, I had enjoyed being kissed by him. It had made me feel, I don't know, wanted, loved, even desired. Fortunately, enough of my brain was on my driving that I made it home without any incidents. I noticed that Carrie's car was nowhere in sight and I parked my car, got out my key and went inside the apartment. I was actually glad that Carrie wasn't home. I needed time to gather my thoughts and come to grips with the conflicting emotions that were raging inside my mind. On one hand, I still knew that, under all this feminine outer shell, there was a guy. I knew that it was totally ridiculous to even think about kissing another guy even looking the way I did. If I enjoyed what Joe and I had done, did that make me gay? But, at the same time, that damned programming was giving me hot flashes over the way I felt when he kissed me. I was actually getting turned on just thinking about it. I must have gone on autopilot just then because I found myself in bed undressed and cleaned up and I didn't remember doing any of it. I laid there, thinking for quite a while, not really paying attention to much of anything else when I felt my hand massaging my breast. My other hand was between my legs, massaging something else, and before I could think about anything else, I was exploding into a massive orgasm. One after another they came, until I couldn't think about anything but the pleasure I was feeling and the emotions that were racing around in my brain. When I finally came back to Earth, I quickly fell asleep and my dreams were of Joe and being held and loved by him, but, in those dreams, I wasn't wearing a bodysuit. I was a real woman and we were making passionate love. It was a strange night, to say the least. I never heard Carrie come home. Thursday morning, I awoke to the sound of the alarm clock buzzing near my ear. I rolled over and hit the damn thing once or twice until it shut up and then sat up in bed. My dreams were rolling through my head like a runaway freight train and my thoughts were scattered. For a second, I didn't know for sure where I was or who I was, but as I began to fully wake up, those dreams began to fade and before too long I was able to think again. I staggered into the bathroom and took a shower. I didn't have time for a long hot bath, although that was exactly what I wanted to do. I finished my shower and scurried back to my room for my clothes. I grabbed some things that looked right and went back to the bathroom. Then I did my hair and makeup and got dressed. I felt like I was still on autopilot and, just then, it felt good to not have to think. I just let the habits and knowledge that those tapes had put into my head take over and before too long, I was ready to leave for work. Grabbing my purse and keys and slipping into my high heels, I went out the door and towards my car. I noticed that Carrie's car still wasn't anywhere in sight and that made me wonder. Where in the hell was he, and what was his part in all of this? I didn't want to believe that he had any knowledge of any of the shenanigans that were going on at AG Deliveries, but how could he not know? He was an investor and knew the people there. Surely he must know what was going on, but how could he do this to me, his old college pal? All the way into work I was thinking like that, and, when I arrived in the parking lot at work, I noticed that, once again all the other girls had beaten me there. I saw Dana just going into the building and I hurriedly parked my car and ran after her. I caught up with her just as she was about to go into the dispatcher's office and I grabbed her arm and steered her towards the break room. Once there, I closed the door and whispered to her, "Meet me after work at the Stumble Inn. I need to talk to you about last night." She looked at me, alarmed, and whispered back, "Are you okay?" "I'll meet you there, but I gotta know if you are okay. Last night you looked scared to death." "No, I'm okay, Dana. I just need to talk to you and find out if what I have been feeling, you have been experiencing as well." Just then, Ms. Smith came into the break room and called to us, "Let's go, girls. Time's a-wasting and there are deliveries to be made. You two gals can gossip after work, now shoo." And she made motions with her hands like she was shooing flies off or something. Dana nodded at me and winked, indicating to me that she understood and would see me later. I nodded back and put a bright smile on my face for Ms. Smith's benefit. Dana and I both went into the dispatcher's office and got our paperwork for the day and went out to our vans. The other girls were already on their way out, so we didn't have time to say any more to one another. The routine held that day. It seemed as though I had just left on my route when, the next thing I knew, I was pulling into the lot with an empty van, my deliveries all having been made. I parked the van and went in and turned in my receipts and tips and went into the break room where the other girls, including Dana, were already sitting. I just sat down and was staring at nothing when Ms. Smith came in and began praising us on another great day. The receipts were up and so were the tips. She handed out our tip envelopes and mine came to $365. Jerry, Terry, Carla and Dana were oohing and ahhing about how much they had made in tips that day when Ms. Smith shouted out, "Rumble seat." The next thing I remember I was walking out of the building with a complete memory of my whole day that I hadn't had a few minutes before. I got into my car and followed Dana to the Stumble Inn and we parked in back of the place. We went in and sat down and I began to tell her what had happened last night between me and Joe and how I had felt about it. Dana seemed sympathetic and was trying to calm me down when the waitress came over and asked us if we wanted to order. We both said we just wanted coffee to begin with and she said okay, and off she went, leaving us alone again. Well, after a few minutes she came back with our coffee and we ordered dinner. When she left again, we went back to our conversation. Dana told me that she kind of understood what I was talking about. She said that she'd had those same kinds of feelings and we attributed it to that damned programming on those tapes. After all, those tapes had inserted into our minds how to walk, talk, move and even emote the way a real woman would, so it was only natural that we would feel attracted to guys while we were wearing the suits. It was still scary to the male part of me that I still seemed to be able to access, though, and I asked Dana if she could do that too. She said that yes, she could, sometimes, but only when something happened that was so far out of her experience as a man that it overloaded the female conditioning somehow. We talked a bit more and finished our dinner, and then we parted company. She headed for home and I headed for Joe's apartment with those tapes. I had remembered to grab them as I went out the door that morning and had them stashed in my trunk. When I pulled into the parking garage at Joe's building, I parked next to his car again and went up in the elevator. When the door opened, Joe came rushing across the room at me and grabbed me and held me tight. He asked, "Are you okay? I followed you on your route today for a bit and it looked like you were spaced out or something. I even hollered to you a couple of times, but you ignored me and just went on with what you were doing. I was worried out of my mind about you." And then, he kissed me. Again. My brain went into overload and I leaned into Joe, not caring anymore that we were both men, only caring that I was being held and kissed and comforted. My male self that I had been able to call upon, retreated somewhere into the deep recesses of my mind and I was reacting only as Ginny. For a few precious minutes Joe held me in that wonderful embrace. When we finally came up for air I managed to remember that I was here to drop off the tapes and, reluctantly, I pushed away from Joe. My head was spinning but I managed to hand Joe the bag with the tapes in it and then I kind of staggered over to the couch and just sort of fell onto it. He didn't say another word, he just went over to the bar and fixed me a drink and brought it over to me. I took it in mostly numb fingers, carefully, and Joe went over to his TV/VCR combo and turned it on and inserted tape number 1. I averted my eyes and tried not to pay attention to what was being shown on the TV screen. I didn't want to give that programming any more of a chance to take a firmer hold of my mind. After a few minutes, Joe shut off the VCR and just sat there for a bit. When he looked at me, there was a look of pity on his face, and when I asked him what was wrong, he just kept looking at me with that look on his face. Pretty soon I couldn't stand it anymore and I excused myself to go and use his bathroom. I needed to go after the coffee at dinner anyway and I knew that my makeup must be a mess after that kiss. When I returned to the living room the tape was on again and Joe was in the kitchen area preparing something. I called out to him that I had already eaten but he just went on with what he was doing. I heard a clicking noise and the VCR shut off. Joe came back into the living room area and sat down next to me on the couch and took my hand in his. Then he began to speak, saying, "Don't talk, just listen. When I first saw you in that bar I was instantly taken by your beauty and seeming helplessness. A little while after that you impressed me by following my lead and helping defuse that situation that would develop had you missed my cue. Then outside the bar you asked for my help and as I looked at your lovely face I knew right then that I was falling in love with you. I know you are a male inside a female bodysuit but I don't care. I only know what I feel and that is, I want you. I know that can't happen right now, if ever, but you have the right to know how I feel. It's wrong and crazy, but there it is. Ginny, I love you. If you were a real woman I would ask you to marry me and even though you are not a real woman, I still want that." He started to say more but I could see tears in his eyes as he made that confession, and the Ginny part of me took over again and I put my finger to his lips and shushed him. "Don't do this to yourself, Joe," I murmured, softly. "Don't torture yourself over something you have no control over. I am beginning to feel the same way about you and I know that it can never be. Right now, I am all Ginny and there is nothing I would like better than to melt into your arms and say yes, yes, yes. But you know I can't do that." Then I began to cry, knowing that this was wrong yet wanting it so badly I could taste it. He took me into his arms and just held me for what seemed to be hours, but was only really a minute or two. Then he let me go and stood up and walked over to an easy chair and sat down again. We didn't look at each other for several minutes and when we finally did, we were both under a bit more control of our emotions. Joe said, "Okay, Ginny, or Jim, or whoever you are, here's the deal. Those tapes definitely contain hypnotic suggestions and are highly illegal. That tells me that there is in fact a lot more going on at your workplace than just a simple delivery service. So, I am going to dig into this with a vengeance and help you, if I can, get free from there and find out what the hell is going on there. I have some contacts in the technical world and I want to touch base with them to see if they know anything about the technology that is behind that bodysuit. I have heard rumors of things like that, but I had no idea they were so advanced as the one you are wearing. What I need you to do is just go along with things the way you have been for a few more days. By tomorrow night I should have more information, and this weekend I am going to try to get inside the place to look at their records and whatever data I can get out of their computers. You say they work on Saturday mornings, so I will look the place over tonight and tomorrow. Then, Saturday afternoon or evening, when I think I can get in without being noticed or caught, I will go in and find what I can. Joe paused then, getting up and taking the tape out of the VCR. Then he continued. For now, let's keep all of this, and I mean all of this, just between you and me. Don't even tell your pal, Dana, about what I intend to do. It'll be better if as few people know as possible. That way, if something happens, no one can come back on Dana. As for you, well, you are going to have to trust me and I will have to trust you. If any of what I intend to do gets out, both our gooses will be cooked. I told Joe that I understood what he was saying and then I stood up, saying, I'd better leave now. If I stay any longer, Ginny is going to come over there and grab you and I can't be held responsible for what she might want to do after that. How do you want to stay in touch with me? Joe looked at me and I could see that he was fighting to keep his emotions and libido in check. He said, I will get hold of you when I have something on the company. Don't worry about how I'll get hold of you, I just will, and you are probably right. You might better leave now while I can still control myself as well. Listen now, I am going to help you get out of this crazy company and keep you safe in the process. First of all, because of how I feel about you, and second, because this whole thing stinks to high heaven and I am pissed off at them for putting both you and me in the spot we're in emotionally. For now, just go on about your normal routine if you have one. Don't do anything to draw attention to yourself or your suspicions. If you have to, tell Dana that you were wrong about what you thought and that I investigated and found the place to be on the up and up. Now, you better go because I have work to do. Joe escorted me to the elevator and down to the garage. I wanted him to hold me again and never let me go, but I also knew that it was the programming that made me feel this way, so I kept a lid on my emotions until I got in the car. I watched Joe go back into the elevator and the doors closed. Then, I lost it. I must have cried for 10 minutes. Great big gulping sobs like my heart was broken. When I calmed down enough to drive, I wiped my tears with a hanky from my purse and started the car and drove home. If I had been stopped by the police for any reason that night, they would have thought I was Raccoon Woman. My mascara was all over around my eyes and down my cheeks from crying. When I got home, still no Carrie, and it shows my state of mind when I say I wasn't even worried about him. I just went inside, washed up and went to bed and cried myself to sleep.
Friday. I awoke before the alarm clock went off and shut down the alarm so it wouldn't go off. I just laid there for a bit trying to get things straight in my head. I couldn't deny that I was having feelings for Joe, but just they were, I wasn't sure. They couldn't be love, though, could they? I mean, yeah, I looked like a woman and I moved and felt like a woman, but that was only on the outside, right? Underneath all of the glamour and femininity, I was still a guy. I knew that, and yet I couldn't shake the feelings I was experiencing. Could it be love? Was it just gratitude for him having saved me from that bunch of lechers at that bar and for him taking on the task of finding out just what the hell was going on in AG deliveries? Those thoughts were warring for attention along with thoughts about Carrie, my friend. Just what was his part in all of this? Was he really my friend, or was he taking advantage of me for some hidden agenda of his own? I unwound myself from the blankets and stood up slowly and stretched. I mean one of those bone-cracking stretches that seems about to tear your muscles loose from their foundations kind of stretches. I walked over to the full-length mirror on the closet door and examined this body I had been stuck in for the last 7 days. Damn, it still looked fantastic. That long red hair and those beautiful curves practically screamed, I am woman, but I wasn't. Then, that funny little click went off in my mind again, and I stopped wondering and worrying about all that. I headed into the bathroom for my morning ritual. I started the tub filling after making sure the water temperature was below that magic 140-degree mark. No way was I gonna get stuck permanently in that suit through some stupid mistake. I bound up my hair on top of my head so I wouldn't have to spend an hour drying and styling it. Tomorrow I would be able to take this thing off, and I was looking forward to that. Finishing off my bath, I climbed out of the tub, all soft and sweet-smelling, and wrapped a towel around my breasts, once again, amazed at the sensations I could feel coming through them. Every touch, every movement, I could feel as if I had grown those things all by myself. The thought went through my mind that I would have to find a way to keep the suit if things went bad at AG deliveries. I mean, I didn't want to be a woman the rest of my life, but it sure might be fun to wear it occasionally after all this was over. There were some compensations for looking pretty after all. Right about then, a memory came crashing in on me, and I just stopped where I was and shivered. The memory was of being held in Joe's strong arms and being kissed by him, and how it made me feel warm and safe and desired, even though it scared me at the same time. What was I? Was I actually becoming a woman by wearing this bodysuit and through the programming contained in those tapes? I knew that there was a chance of getting stuck in the suit, and if that ever happened, I would truly be sealed inside it for the rest of my life. But would that mean that I would actually change sex at that point? And if it did, would I truly be a woman capable of having babies? It seemed unlikely that merely becoming trapped inside the bodysuit would change my insides, but it would mean that I would have to live as a woman for the rest of my life. These thoughts and a lot of others went through my mind that Friday morning as I went about my morning routine of bath, hair, makeup, and clothing choices. They were still going through my mind as I drove to work. I was very early getting there, so I stopped at the restaurant across the street from the AGD parking lot for breakfast. As I sat there, eating, Dana came in, having seen my car in the lot out front. She sat down and ordered a cup of coffee, and when we were alone, asked me what Joe had thought and what he was going to do. I told her what Joe had told me to tell her about it being my imagination and all that, and she looked at me like I had lost what was left of my mind. What? She practically screamed at me. Do you mean to tell me that everything you and I have noticed wrong and all this bodysuit stuff is just what it appears to be, a delivery service? I had to shush her before she caused a scene inside the restaurant, and to calm her down a bit, I also said, "Listen, Dana." Joe said that he had checked into it and it appeared to be on the up and up, but he was going to do a bit more looking into it and he would let me know what he found out. Until I hear from him, I think we should carry on as we have been doing. After all, if we raise any suspicions over there at work, we could be in serious trouble if there is anything going on. Besides, tomorrow is Saturday and we can get out of these suits for the weekend. Then we find out what, if any, effect the programming has on us when we look like ourselves again. For now, I intend to go over there, do my job, and go home. Tonight I am gonna climb out of this damn girl suit and go out and get laid by the first good-looking woman I can pick up. I'll call you Saturday morning and we can compare notes on how we feel and what effects may or may not be remaining after we get out of the suits, okay? Dana looked at me for a minute without saying anything. Then she sighed and, in a resigned-sounding tone of voice, said, "Okay, Ginny, but you better be right about this. My folks are supposed to be coming this weekend for a visit, and I damn sure don't want them to see me looking like this. Hey, I just thought about something. What if we have to work tomorrow morning? Oh shit. If we have to, I am screwed. My folks will be coming in tonight." At that point, Dana was getting louder and louder, and I had to quiet her down again, so I said, "Dana, calm down. If we were gonna have to work this weekend, they would have said something by now. I think that they will want to take the weekend to look at how things are going and make any needed adjustments to our routes and charges, so just relax. Anyway, we'll find out when we get over there, so let's not panic." Well, she finally calmed down and I paid for breakfast and we drove across the street and parked our cars. Then we went into the dispatcher's office to see if there was anything posted about having to work tomorrow morning. There was a list for Saturday, but neither Dana nor I were on it. Jerry, Terry, and Carla were, though, and we wondered how they would take the news when they got here. About 10 minutes later, all three of them showed up and we all got our assignments and delivery schedules from Ms. Smith. Terry, Carla, and Jerry actually seemed excited about the prospect of working Saturday morning, though. They were talking excitedly about the extra money they could make and how they were going to be able to pay off all their bills in a month or two if things kept going the way they were. I did kind of wonder why Dana and I weren't scheduled to work tomorrow morning, but I didn't raise any questions then. I wasn't about to gaze a gratuitous equestrian in the Orus Maximus, as my dad used to say. In other words, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I didn't want to remain in this bodysuit 1 minute longer than I absolutely had to. There were too many questions I needed answers to, and I couldn't get them while I was still wearing it. I also knew that I had to see Joe while I wasn't wearing the bodysuit so I could find out if the feelings I was having about him were real or just the result of the programming. So I kept quiet about everything, and a little while later, we all went to our vans and started our day. I had gotten used to that hazy feeling at the end of each day, and when I found myself back at the parking lot at the end of the day, I wasn't too surprised. I went in and turned in my log and receipts and went to the break room. A short time later, the rest of the girls showed up and joined me in the break room. Then Miss Smith came in and handed out our tip envelopes, and this time, mine came to over $400. Then I heard that word again, rumble seat. And my whole day returned to me as clear and accurate as anything I had ever experienced. Every single stop and delivery I had made that day was there in my mind, and once again I felt that click in my mind. We started to leave, everyone talking excitedly about their tips when Ms. Smith stopped us, saying, "Girls, you have had a marvelous first week. We here at AG Deliveries are so happy with your performance that we have taken the liberty of arranging a shopping trip and dinner for you all. A limousine will be picking you all up here in the parking lot in about 15 minutes to take you first to a very upscale ladies' clothing store for a complete outfit, and then to the Palms restaurant for a lovely dinner. All the bills will be picked up by the company, including tips for the limo driver and at the restaurant. The spending limit at the clothing store is $400 per person, and dinner has already been paid for, regardless of what you order. Now, this doesn't mean that you can buy drinks for the house, of course, but anything you girls order and consume personally will be taken care of by the company, so have a ball. Now," she continued, "Terry, Jerry, and Carla, you three are working tomorrow morning, so I suggest you keep your alcohol consumption down to a minimum, and you will all be brought back here to pick up your cars after dinner, so maybe it would be a good idea for all of you to keep the drinking down. You will have the rest of the weekend to celebrate. Now, girls, you have a few minutes to make any phone calls you might need to make arrangements with relatives or friends for this evening. Have fun, ladies." And with that, she left the room. Chaos ensued. Everyone was talking at once, and I couldn't make heads nor tails out of any of what was being said. It was just a babble of excited voices. Dana and I joined in, of course, not wanting to draw any attention to ourselves, but the thoughts going through my mind were, to say the least, not happy ones. I had been looking forward to getting out of this bodysuit and spending an evening as myself again. Now that would have to be delayed until we were done with dinner. Well, there was nothing for it but to go through with it, so I went to a phone and tried to call Carrie. There was no answer, so I left a message on the machine and hung up. All the other girls were on the phones, so I went out onto the loading dock and, sure enough, there was a long white limo waiting there. In a few minutes, the other girls came out, and we all piled into the limo and headed for a shopping excursion on the company's nickel. We arrived at the chosen store, Branson's, in an upscale neighborhood, and were escorted into the store by the limo driver, who presented the store manager with a credit card which bore the name of the company. We girls spread out into the store looking at this and that, and Dana and I found ourselves together in the lingerie section. We tried to maintain this same level of excitement that the other three girls were evidencing and picked out some beautiful bra and panty sets, and then headed for the dressing rooms to try them on. We kept our conversation to what we were doing and didn't discuss any of our suspicions at all while we were in the store or the limo. The set I had picked out was agua in color with lots of lace on the panties and in the center of the bra, which had a front closure. Dana had chosen a powder blue set with lots of lace as well, and everything fit very well, indeed. We changed back into our other underwear and left the dressing rooms as the other girls were coming in. They were giggling and talking excitedly about what else they were going to buy and showing each other the underwear sets they had picked out. Dana and I headed for the dress section and began looking for something to match our new undies. When we had made out choices, we returned to the dressing rooms and tried things on. Again, everything fit very well and we changed into the new clothing. Then we went to the shoe area and were assisted by a very anxious young guy who was more than happy to help us try on several pairs of shoes each. I am sure that he got more than an eyeful, helping us and the other girls, and before too long we all were fully outfitted in new clothing from the skin out, including new hose and garter belts. We all headed into the salon area of the store where we were all treated to quick but thorough makeovers of our makeup and freshening of our hair, and then through the fragrances area where we were spritzed with what smelled like very expensive perfumes, a different one for each of us. Then, we headed back to the limo while the driver settled up with the store. The sounds of all those high heels clicking on the pavement was strangely exciting, and the chatter that was going on was almost hypnotic, and Dana and I couldn't help joining in on the fun. I figured, what the hell? I might as well try to enjoy this, and I'm sure that Dana was thinking the same thing. The driver came out finally, and we headed for our dinner. When we pulled up in front of the restaurant, a uniformed man opened the door for us and assisted each of us as we exited the limo, and then we headed into the restaurant like a group of movie stars or something. I could almost feel the eyes of every guy we passed as they looked us over, and while a small part of me resented it, a much larger part was reveling in the attention I was receiving. All through dinner, we were besieged by men with drinks and offers to dance and lights for cigarettes. So much so, in fact, that I can't recall to this day what I had to eat. I know I had fun, and when the time came to leave, I was actually sorry that it was over. To my amazement, I had almost accepted an offer to go out on the town that evening with a very good-looking guy who seemed fascinated by me. I finally remembered, however, that I wanted to get home and out of this bodysuit and be me again, and that overrode any temptation I might have otherwise have given into. I whispered my regrets in his ear and gave him a look that promised better things at some future time, and we all got up and left the restaurant. The limo met us outside the front door and we all piled back in, and we were taken back to the parking lot of AGD. Miss Smith met us there and complimented each of us on our choices in clothing and then told us that the official evening out was over. She also said that if any of us wanted to meet her and some other members of the office staff for some more partying, we could accompany them to a dance lounge and party the night away. I know that this offer was directed at Dana and I because the others had to work in the morning, and I could see that Miss Smith seemed disappointed that Dana and I declined the invitation. Dana made her excuses and jumped in her car and left, and I did the same thing. All the way home I kept wondering what might have happened if I had taken Miss Smith up on the offer to go partying, but the need to get out of the suit was growing with each moment that passed. When I finally got home, I parked my car and practically ran across the lot and up the stairs. No mean feat in those new 4-inch heels, let me tell you. I looked around inside the apartment, but no Carrie, so I found the instructions for removing the bodysuit and began the preparations. I filled the tub with water above 120 degrees, but not over 130 degrees as it said in the instructions, and while it was filling, I stripped out of my pretty new clothes. I took care of them because they were expensive and, well, I did like them. When the tub was ready, I double-checked the water temperature with the thermometer I kept in there expressly for that purpose, and then I climbed in, sat down, and laid back in the water. It seemed hot, but I figured that it was because I was anxious and worried, but it had to be the right temperature. I double-checked it, right? As I laid there in that hot water, my thoughts drifted back to Joe and what he might find out this weekend when he did his investigation inside the HD building. I actually hoped he would find nothing wrong there, but I knew that it was too much to hope for. I mean, let's face it, this was really a good job and it paid damn well, even though I had to wear a bodysuit and pretend to be a woman. Add to that the fact that I was making new friends in the forms of Jerry, Terry, Carla, and Dana, and it really was a dream situation, except, again, for that woman thing. Oh well, I sighed and relaxed back into the hot water, waiting for the suit to loosen up, already planning the next 2 evenings out as myself again. After about 20 minutes, I could feel something happening, but it felt strange. Almost as if the suit were tightening instead of loosening. I sat up, frightened, and my mind was going around in circles wondering what I could have done wrong. I had followed all the instructions to the letter, even double-checking the water temperature, hadn't I? I climbed out of the tub and started to run across the bathroom to the door, but I slipped and fell, hitting my head on the counter as I went down. I must have knocked myself out because the next thing I remember was being shaken and someone slapping me gently on the face. As I came to, I saw Carrie with a worried look on his face. He was sitting on the floor of the bathroom with my head in his lap, calling my name. Jim, are you all right? Oh man, this is all my fault. I should never have gotten you involved in this thing. Come on, Jim, wake up and let me know that you aren't hurt. I swear to God I never meant for you to get hurt. After a few minutes my head began to clear a bit and I said, okay, Carrie, okay. Geez, quit hitting me in the head. Where does it say that you should hit someone with a head injury in the head? He stopped and kind of shuddered and started to cry. Oh, Jim, I'm sorry. Jesus, Jim, I never meant for you to get hurt. It was only supposed to be a test of the bodysuits. I don't even know what for. All I know is what they told me, and they said that if the test was successful, I would be able to triple or even quadruple my investment in just a couple of months. He babbled on like that for a few more minutes before I finally stopped him and said, Carrie, just what the hell are you talking about? Ooh, my head hurts. Get me up off this cold floor, will ya? He helped me to my feet, and we staggered out into the living room where Carrie covered me with a comforter and sat me down on the couch. He went over and fixed me a drink and brought it back to me. Then he sat down next to me and took my hand in his and looked into my eyes. Before he could say anything, though, the door to the apartment burst open and 3 huge guys came rushing in. 2 of them grabbed Carrie and the other one grabbed me and wrapped me up tightly in that comforter. I could hear the sounds of fighting going on, but I couldn't see anything that was happening. I was so wrapped up in that damned comforter I couldn't do anything. Pretty soon, all was quiet in the apartment again, and when I finally got my eyes clear of the comforter I saw Carrie, apparently out cold, being carried out of the apartment by the 2 guys that had attacked him, and the other guy slung me and the comforter over his shoulder and followed them. He warned me to be quiet or they would hurt me and Carrie very badly, so I kept my mouth shut as I was carried outside and dumped unceremoniously into a van along with Carrie. The door slammed shut and the van accelerated away from there quickly. Now what the hell was going on? I had thought I was in trouble before, but that seemed insignificant compared with what was happening now. As the van sped through the night, I laid there, helplessly wrapped up and scared to death both for me and Carrie. I didn't know what was happening, but I was afraid that it wasn't going to go well for either of us.
Thanks.
Please. Friday night. I felt the prick of a needle in my arm, and after a few seconds more, I felt nothing at all. Just blackness and some very strange dreams, all centered around the bodysuit and Joe. In the dreams, I was walking down an aisle and all my new friends were there. Jerry, Terry, Carla, Dana, Miss Smith, and Carol, even Carrie, and a lot of people I didn't recognize. They all had smiles on their faces and a few of them were crying. I could see Joe at the end of the aisle, and as I turned my head to the left, I saw my dad. My arm was slipped through his and we were walking towards Joe, who had the biggest smile of all on his face. I looked down and I could see that I was wearing a beautiful white dress, and I could feel that my hair was all done up on top of my head. I was carrying a large bouquet of flowers and it hit me. I was wearing a wedding gown. Joe was dressed in a very sharp-looking black suit and was smiling at me with love in his eyes. My 4 friends from AGD were all dressed in matching turquoise gowns and all were just lovely. Dad and I walked slowly up the aisle where Joe and a minister were waiting. I was getting married? To Joe? I heard the minister begin to say, "Dearly beloved," when I began to lose the dream. All of a sudden, Joe and the minister vanished. My dad was gone, and then the whole church and all the people were gone as well. All that remained was a single figure, and I could hear a loud sigh come from that person. I started walking towards the figure, and as I got closer, I could tell it was a man. I heard him sigh again, and then he began to speak. Ginny, he began in a sorrowful tone of voice. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had to go and get suspicious, and, as if that weren't bad enough, you had to drag Dana into it with you. Right then I began to wake up and I realized that the last part of that dream had not been a dream after all. A man was talking to me. I was lying on a kind of a bed. I later found out it was a hospital gurney, and I was unable to move. My arms and legs were secured, somehow, and my head was being held still by a strap across my forehead. There was a light shining in my eyes, and I couldn't see very clearly through its glare. The voice either got louder or moved closer to me because I could hear it much more clearly now, and it said, "Oh, are we awake, finally? I told those muscle brains not to use the whole syringe of sedative on you. A little thing like you shouldn't have required more than half of it, but do they listen to me? Nua, they have to follow their orders." The voice began to mumble something, but I couldn't make it out. Then it got loud again. "So here you are, my dear. All trussed up and awaiting final treatment along with your friend, Dana, to your right. I'm really sorry this is necessary, Jenny. The programming on those tapes should have left you pretty much unable to discern fantasy from reality where it applied to AGD. Apparently, in yours and Dana's cases, it wasn't quite strong enough to overcome certain psychological resistance to it. Well, that will be remedied here tomorrow. When you wake up Sunday morning, you will be just one more happy girl, looking forward to going to work at your fascinating and well-paid job at AGD, and you won't be bothered by thoughts of once having been a male. You see, Jenny, AGD is quite real. It is, in fact, a delivery service, and from the looks of the first week of operations, it will be a very profitable little sideline to the more important end of the business. And what, you may ask, is that business? Why, the testing of the very technology that you wear so fetchingly upon your male body right now. Yes, Ginny, this whole thing was to have been a test of the bodysuits and programming by, well, I am not permitted to tell you who, right now, but before you undergo the final process, I think I will persuade my superiors to let me tell you the complete story so you will know, even though it will do you no good to have the information. The voice sounded very familiar, but in my still half-drugged condition, I was unable to identify who it was for sure. I heard my own voice asking about Carrie, and the man answered, saying, "Oh, don't worry about him, my dear. Your friend is just fine." As a matter of fact, he had been getting just a little too nosy for his own good as well, so I talked the higher-ups into letting me include him in our little test program by the time you leave here Sunday. You will just be two girlfriends sharing an apartment far away from the one you have been living in. Yes, Ginny, you and little Carrie will be the cutest, sweetest little delivery girls in the LA area, sharing makeup tips and clothing and even boyfriends. And you will be quite eager and willing and even able to please your boyfriends, Ginny, because before we are done here, you and Carrie and Dana will be fully functioning females, perfectly capable of getting pregnant and carrying a baby to full term and birth. Your DNA will be remapped so that you will appear to any test you care to name to always have been female. Your records will be altered right down to your birth certificates and fingerprints. The reprogramming in yours and Dana's cases and the initial programming in Carrie's case will wipe out any memories you have of life as a man and replace them with an entire lifetime's worth of memories of growing up as a girl. Then, you three will be sent back to AGD to finish out the test program before being assigned to a top-secret, virtually unknown branch of the government for further testing of the bodysuits and possible assignments all over the world. Oh, Ginny, I almost envy you the life you will lead. Why, you and Dana could become two of the top secret agents in the world. You will have more adventures and excitement than you could ever have had as poor unsuspecting Jim and Dan. Just think of it, Ginny. You and Dana could have world leaders groveling at your feet begging to be allowed to worship you as the beautiful women you truly will become. You will be gathering information and secrets to bring back to our government to use against enemies of the American way, and having more fun and adventure than any woman ever has had. You'll be wined and dined by the most handsome, powerful, wealthiest men on the planet, and just then, another voice cut in saying, "Frank, you talk too much. See that they are comfortable and that all the 4 drips are in place and working properly. We have a lot of work to do before tomorrow night, and it has to be perfectly done, or it will all be a waste of time, and we shall have to start all over. Now hop to it. Unless you want to find yourself in one of those bodysuits, yourself, only this time, permanently." I could hear someone moaning softly to my right, and I recognized Dana's voice saying something, but I didn't quite catch all of it. Then, Frank began to speak again, saying, "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Then he began to fuss with the 4 leads which were attached to my arms. He whispered to me then, "Oh, Don't look so surprised. Yes, Han, I was your little waitress at the restaurant across the street from AGD, and every word that you and Dana said, while in there was recorded and stored. Even that wouldn't have been enough to cause us to resort to this, but that combined with your refusal to go out and party on the company's nickel and the tapes of your conversations at home, made us suspicious that the programming on your tapes wasn't sufficiently effective to keep you in line. By the way, Jenny, what did you do with those tapes? Our men couldn't find them when they searched your place. Of course, those bumblers couldn't find their asses with both hands. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Those tapes will turn up and then we will re-record them with stronger suggestions so that we will, hopefully, not be forced to do this again. And, Jenny? Don't worry your pretty little head about the other 3 girls. They're fine and the programming seems to have worked perfectly on them. They won't be harmed and will continue at AGD as our little inside information gatherers. They will form the first level of the finest espionage training school ever. Then that other voice came back again telling Frank to make it quick, and Frank left me there with my thoughts. To say the very least, I was scared, and of all people to be part of this thing, Frank? I hadn't seen or heard anything from him since the last day of orientation at AGD. Yet, here he was and involved up to his eyebrows, from the looks of it, and to think. He had been posing as that little waitress all this time just to keep an eye on me and Dana. Then I started to get mad. As the medication started to wear off, I got madder and madder to think that my own government could be involved in something like this. Kidnapping and shanghaiing citizens for some espionage scheme, against their will and without their prior knowledge. I knew if I ever got out of this, I was going to sue everyone and everything in sight. Well, then again, maybe it would be just as well if I just left things alone if I ever got out of this. After all, if it was the government behind this, what chance would I have against that kind of power? Then, another thought hit me and I began to panic. Joe! What about Joe? He was going to conduct his investigation tomorrow at AGD's main building. What if he got caught? Or worse, what if he were caught and put into the same situation in which I now found myself? My thoughts continued along those lines for another few minutes until Frank reappeared at my side. He said, "Sweet dreams, Jenny. The next time you wake up, you will be all Jenny. No more Jim to worry about. Just an exciting life ahead of you as a secret agent." He kissed me on the cheek and turned a valve on the 4-tube, and I began to get sleepy very shortly after that. In what seemed like no time, I was out cold again. Only when I awoke the next time I would be somebody totally different from what I ever had been if these people carried through on their threats. Friday midnight. From a fragment of audio tape found at the underground headquarters used for transformational research. Thing said? This voice has been conclusively identified as the head of this operation. Yes, sir. The DNA-altering formula, along with the primary mind-altering drugs, are in the IVs now being administered to the subjects. In the space of 24 hours, their DNA structure will be indistinguishable from a genetic female's, and their minds will be fully open to whatever suggestions we decide to place in them. This voice has been identified as the voice of Frank Schmitter. Very well, then. All that remains is to clean out their apartments and erase everything we can find out about their former lives. This means, of course, notifying their next of kin, if any, and if necessary, altering their memories as well, and, if all else fails, well, you know what to do. Yes, sir. We are to either reprogram or eliminate anyone who might be a threat to this operation, by whatever means necessary. All public information on any computer network anywhere in the U.S. will be either wiped clean or replaced with the appropriate information matching the new appearances of the subjects. The reprogramming shouldn't be too difficult with the new tapes, and the wiping of the information should be accomplished in 36 hours or less. It ought to be a very simple job to do. It had better be easy, and it had better be done correctly, Frank. You know what is riding on this experiment. Not only the future of our country as we know it should be, but also our own personal safety and lives depend on this being done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. If the President or Congress should get wind of this before we are ready to present our complete and successful findings to them, we might as well kiss our collective asses goodbye. We'll spend the rest of our lives either in prison or in hiding from every spy agency the government can put on our trails. At least I will. You will be dead, Frank. I cannot afford to leave loose ends like you laying around, but let's not think of that right now. Let's think of the rewards that will await us when our theories are proven successful. We'll have the world at our feet at that point, Frank, and we won't know how to spend the interest on the money we will make from this, let alone the principal. Dr. Kulwicki is due in tomorrow afternoon from Vienna? Yes, Frank. He will arrive at approximately noon tomorrow at LAX. You and 2 men will meet him there and bring him straight here using the limo with the blacked-out windows. He will rest for about 8 hours and then perform the final surgery on the subjects, removing their external male organs and inserting the normal female reproductive organs and constructing their external genitalia. He is not only a master of this kind of surgery, he is the inventor and developer of the organs themselves. I do not know the exact means by which he does this, but it will be detailed in the courier packet he will be bringing with him. Sir, I am a bit concerned about leaving you here with only 2 men from the security force. With all the other teams out in the field, you will be vulnerable here. I know, Frank, but it is unavoidable. Besides, we know our cover is still tight. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, this is just a simple delivery service. No one but those of us involved knows that the basement contains these labs and rooms. Okay, sir. You're the boss here, but I don't intend to leave you here alone any longer than I absolutely have to. Too much depends on the success of this operation. You can bet that I will be back here with the doctor before you even know I'm gone. Very well, Frank. We all know what we have to do, and we know that it has to go right, or we are all lost. We are the only ones who believe in the stories of the alien threat. The President and Congress don't believe it, but I have seen the proof. No means are too extreme to assure the survival of our race. If we fail, history will note this date as the beginning of the end for the human race. Even now, the new Arcanian ambassador is scheduling the peace accords with our government, and if he succeeds, it'll only be a matter of a few years until the alien infiltrators are everywhere throughout the world in positions of power. We must buy time for our scientists to master the technology of that UFO that we captured last year. As far as we have been able to determine, that ship belonged to the only race to ever successfully resist the Arcanians' enslavement of their worlds, the Alphans. You also know that the world is unaware of the presence, or even the existence of these aliens so far. The only ones who know of their existence are those in power, and they are hiding it from the general public until everything is settled, and they feel that the rest of the world can be told of them. You can depend on me, sir. I'll get the doctor here or die trying. Has there been any more news of the Arcanian hit team that we detected near here last week? They have eliminated 4 of 5 of our members in the last month, you know. No, Frank, they haven't been heard from in the last 5 or 6 days. We have to hope that they are still in Nevada sifting through the false leads we left there. If we are lucky and we have done our work properly, they won't get wind of this part of our operation until after we are ready for them to know about it. By then, it'll be too late for them to do anything openly about it, and we will have more security measures in place. According to the latest data, the Alphan force field will be available to us, and the Arcanians have nothing portable that can penetrate that. They would need a full-scale assault by one of their large cruisers to penetrate even this small version of the field, and they won't risk that even if they do find us here. We're also fortunate that we were able to salvage that Alphan scout ship that crashed in the Nevada desert last month. If that hit team had beaten us to it, we would have been in serious trouble. As it is, they know it crashed, and they know that the MB got to it first. What they don't know is that the MB are working for US. It's too bad that we have to do any of what we have planned for Jim and Carrie and Dan, but if they had gotten any more suspicious, they could have jeopardized our mission, and we can't allow that to happen. Yes, sir, I understand that. Actually, their resistance to the hypnotic programming has proved to be an advantage to the mission, though. Now we will have 3 agents who should be able to infiltrate the Arcanian legation without the slightest suspicion, seeing as how the Arcanians consider females unimportant and useful only for breeding and child-rearing. And they seem to have developed a real fascination with Earth females. Yes, Frank, that's very true. I don't yet know why they consider Earth females so exotic, but it will work to our advantage. Through Jim and Dan and Carrie, we will have eyes and ears inside the Arcanian hierarchy here on Earth, and we'll be able to take them down from within. The information gathered by our agents will enable us to convince world leaders that the Arcanians are only interested in subjugating the human race, as they have done to so many others across the stars. Once we can convince the leaders, then we can introduce the Alphans and their technology, and with that, we can drive those Arcanian bastards back into space and away from our planet forever. Sir, I have to ask you, for my own peace of mind, can't we let Jim and Carrie and Dan in on this and offer them the chance to volunteer? I hated lying to them, and especially Jim. He seemed to be a decent guy, and he has showed remarkable willpower through all of what has been done to him. For that matter, so has Dan. Carrie is just a money-hungry investor and will make an excellent servant to the Arcanians once we have wiped his memory, but I think we need people like Jim and Dan on our side. Not as just brain-wiped and programmed puppets, but as active and aware members of the mission team. Frank, you may be right about that, and I will discuss it with our people before the final mind wipe is done. I tend to agree with you, but the mission is what counts here, not our feelings about Jim and Dan. NO's sacrifice is too great to make in order to drive these aliens from our planet, and if that includes making sacrificial lambs of a few good people, including ourselves, well, that's the way it will have to be. We can't afford to fail here, Frank. If we do, well, you know what the result will be. Virtual slavery to the Arcanians and our planet stripped of every resource that matters. The end of the human race as a viable entity is the universe and one more world under the thumb of the Arcanian Empire. They must be stopped, and we are the ones chosen by fate or whatever to try to do it. With the help of the Alphans and their technology, we have a chance. Now go and try to get some rest. I will talk to Jim and Dan tomorrow after I speak with our people about your suggestion and get their approval. I also want to speak with the Alphan leader and get his take on it as well. Okay, sir. I'll try to get some sleep and be ready to pick up the doctor tomorrow. Thanks for considering my ideas about Jim and Dan. I think they could be of much more use to the team as active and knowing members of it instead of just programmed information gatherers like Carrie will end up being. You should get some rest as well, sir. You will need to be in possession of all your faculties when you speak with our people and especially with the Alphans. You know that they demand absolute clarity of thought and purpose. The only reason they decided to help us in the first place is because their envoys saw something in our boss that convinced them that he and his organization could help defeat the Arcanians. You're right again, Frank. I will try to get some rest as well. What the hell is that? The fragment of tape ends here. We are not sure of what the disturbance was that caused the outburst from the individual who was speaking last, but our investigation will continue. Saturday, 12:35 a.m. I awoke with someone slapping my face. Not hard, but it was annoying me. I wanted to sleep. Why was it, I wondered, that lately it seemed like everyone who wanted to wake me up did so by slapping my face? Couldn't they just yell or throw cold water on me? No. I tried to get my hand up to stop whoever it was from slapping me, but I couldn't move my arms. I didn't want to open my eyes because I knew that once I did, I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep, and I wanted to sleep. I was so tired. I tried to say, "Stop slapping me and let me sleep," but it came out like, "Go away, let me alone," in a kind of whiny voice. Whoever it was that was slapping me just wouldn't quit it, though, so I finally opened my eyes and it was Joe. He stopped slapping me when he saw my eyes were opening and said, "Ginny, come on, you gotta wake up. Come on, honey, you have to wake up and we gotta get moving out of here." I couldn't figure out why Joe seemed so upset, but my mind was very fuzzy and I couldn't think straight. I began to remember a little bit of what Frank had been saying to me, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so, in my sleepy state, I dismissed it like one dismisses a bad dream. Joe started doing something by my side, and before too long I could move my arms again. I took advantage of that fact and tried to grab hold of Joe and pull him down to me, but instead he pulled me up to a sitting position and hugged me. In a ragged-sounding voice, he started telling me that he was glad to find me before anything had happened to me. He was murmuring things in my ear and holding me tight, and it felt so good. I think I finally knew, at that exact moment, that I had fallen for Joe. Yes, damn it, I was in love. With another man. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You are saying to yourself, well, he must have always been gay, and this business with the bodysuit, combined with the drugs in his system, just finally brought it out. Well, you are wrong. I never in my life had ever had a thought about another man, but somehow I felt like it was all right to fall in love with this man and that he would protect and love me back. Maybe the bodysuit and the programming and the drugs made it easier to admit to myself that I loved Joe, but it wasn't just those things. I had been pretty lonely most of my young life with few girlfriends, and none of them ever really serious, and none of them were anything special to me. They were just flirtations, just the normal experimentations of an inexperienced youth with no real idea of what he wanted or needed. All I really knew right then, sitting there being held tightly by Joe, was that, for the first time in my life, someone needed and wanted me. It didn't seem to matter to me whether that person was male or female, or whether I was, for that matter, male or female. All that seemed to matter to me right then was that I was being held, and the one holding was telling me that he loved me. Everything began to come back to me then, and I started to tremble as I remembered the kidnapping and waking up here, wherever here was, and all that Frank had told me. Joe just held me tighter and was whispering things in my ear, and I never wanted him to let me go, but then he said, "Jenny, we've got to get out of here." I broke in and knocked out a couple of guys, but there have to be more of them around. I don't know how many of them there might be, but I didn't come prepared to handle more than 2 or 3. I took a chance last night, and I followed you home. I saw that van pull up out front, and I saw those men take you and someone else out of your apartment. I followed the van, and it led me here to AGD, where I watched them take you and the other person from the van and take you into the building. After a few minutes, I snuck up on one guy outside and knocked him out and tied him up and tried to figure out where they had taken you. It took me a few minutes, but I finally found a hidden set of stairs, and when I went down them, I found a locked door and another guard. I had to shoot him because he drew a gun on me and tried to shoot me. He had some keys on him, and one of them opened the outer door to this area. I waited until I had a chance and opened the second door, but when I did, I set off some kind of alarm, and all hell is gonna break loose very soon, I think. I slipped off the table and tried to stand, but I was very wobbly on my legs, and I suddenly realized that I was still naked. Joe handed me his jacket, and I used it to cover myself up as much as I could, and we started out of there with Joe supporting me. I stopped suddenly, remembering Carrie and Dana, and mentioned them to Joe, saying, "Joe, we can't leave Carrie and Dana here. They are only here because of me and my suspicions. If something happens to them, it'll be my fault, and I won't be able to live with that." And Joe said, "Jenny, we don't have time to get them out too. If I can, after I get you to someplace safe, I'll come back for them with some help and maybe the cops, but right now, I have to get you out of here." I tried to argue with him, but I was too weak and still too confused from the drug still in my system, and he practically dragged me towards the door at the other end of the room. We were almost there when I heard a voice yell, "Hold it right there. You can't get out of here. All the exits are relocked and there are 4 guns trained on you right now. We don't want to have to kill you, but we will if we have to. Now let the girl go and step away from her." I looked at Joe and he looked at me. We knew we were caught and there was no way out. He whispered to me, "What do you want to do, Jenny?" "I can try to fight our way out of here, but I'm afraid of what might happen to you if I do." I looked into his eyes and saw the indecision there. I knew he wanted to get me out of here, but I couldn't take the chance that he might get hurt if killed trying. I thought about it for all of about 3 seconds before I finally said, "You've got to do what you think best, Joe. If you think we can make it out of here without getting killed, then let's try for it. If not, well, you tried and I love you for it. It's not your fault. You weren't expecting to have to try something like this, and you weren't prepared for it. There's no sense in our getting killed trying to do the impossible. Maybe they won't hurt you if we just surrender and don't try to fight them. Besides, Joe, they aren't going to hurt me. They just want to examine me to see what the problem with this bodysuit is." I lied to him. My mind was clearing fast with all the adrenaline that was pumping through me. I knew that these people, whoever they were, wouldn't hesitate to kill Joe and maybe even me if we resisted, and things looked too hopeless right then to try anything brave or stupidly heroic. It looked hopeless to me, and I called out to whoever it was that had been yelling to us to surrender. "Okay, we give up." And I pushed myself in front of Joe. I hoped that they wouldn't shoot me to get to Joe. From 4 different places in the room came men with guns drawn. Then I heard that other voice again, the amplified one that I knew but couldn't quite place. "Hold your fire, men. it said. They're caught and they know it. Then in quieter tones it continued. You, sir, whoever you are, I congratulate you on even finding this place, much less on your apparent skills in actually gaining access to this lower level. Please, sir, drop your gun and turn to face the wall while my men check you for any other weapons you might have on your person. Frank, please escort Ginny back to the gurney and resecure her if you would. I think we can forgo the four for now, but make sure she is securely strapped down. We don't want her to get any wild ideas at the last minute, do we? While Frank restrapped me to the gurney, the other men were searching Joe and tying him to a chair. After Frank had me well secured, he turned to Joe and made sure he was just as well secured, and then he said, "Okay, sir. They are all tied down and can't cause any more problems for the moment. It's safe to come down." A few seconds later, I heard a door slam and footsteps coming closer and closer. Then a figure stepped into the lighted area, and my eyes must have gotten bigger than saucers, because as he stepped into the lighted area, he began to peel back a mask, and as his real face was revealed, I gasped in shock. This guy wasn't human. He looked like some kind of cross between a man and a lizard. He stood there for a few minutes, a long reptilian tongue wrapping itself grotesquely around his snout. Then he spoke, saying, "My real name, you would not be able to pronounce, so just think of me as Link because that is what I am. I am the link between your race and mine, the ALLLLLLLLLLLL. We are a star-faring race from a galaxy, as one of your movies so quaintly put it, far, far away. So far that the distance really means little in your terms. We are here to try to help you in resisting a hostile takeover by another race, the Arcanians, who are only interested in enslaving your race and stripping your planet of every resource. They care little for individual planets or people, but rather, only for the advancement of their own race and their selfish goals. They are murderous, bloodthirsty, and totally ruthless in their goals, and will stop at nothing to gain what they want. My race is the only one who has ever resisted them, and we drove them from our world, but at such a great cost to us in lives and resources that our own planet became all but uninhabitable. The bodysuits that Ginny and her friends are wearing, and the technology that created them are ours. We hoped, by using them and infiltrating the Arcanian delegation to your leaders and gather enough information about their plans so we could assist your race in throwing off their attempt at enslaving yet another race and planet and, at the same time, gain an ally in our fight against them throughout the universe." I snuck a look at Joe to see how he was taking all of this, and his mouth was as far open as mine was. He was sort of gasping for air like a fish out of water the same way I was, but I had an advantage on Joe. I was still full of the drugs that had been in that four, and now that I was strapped back down, the adrenaline was wearing off, and I was sort of getting a little loopy again. So, although I was quite taken aback by what this Link was telling us, the drugs were kind of insulating me from the main impact of his words. Link talked quite a bit more, but it was all dry technical stuff, and I don't remember a lot of it. The gist of it was, though, the Arcanians had developed a fascination for Earth females, and Dana, and I and the rest of the girls from AGD were going to be drafted into the fight against their takeover of Earth, whether we wanted to be or not. Link explained a bit about the bodysuits and the programming on those tapes, and told us how some people were, seemingly, somewhat immune to the programming. That was the reason why Dana and I had been able to resist some of the stuff that had been on those tapes, and, it turned out, we weren't the only ones. There had been others, but not many, and they, like us, were going to be drafted into the fight against the Arcanians. Terry, Carla, Jerry, and Carrie were going to be used to train others and monitor their progress. Yes, I said Carrie. Link had decided that Carrie knew too much and was bound to ask too many questions, so he, too, was to be put into one of the bodysuits and subjected to the programming. Make no mistake about it, these ALLLLLLLLLLLLLLLLLLLLL were, in their own way, as ruthless as the Arcanians. They would allow no impediments to their eventual goal of defeating the Arcanians and freeing as many worlds as they could in the process. Anything that stood in the way of their goals was either drafted into the cause or, well, eliminated as a possible threat in any one of a number of ways. Link decided to wake Dana and explain things to her while I recovered from the drugged four. He still didn't know what to do for sure with Joe, and I tried my best to talk him out of putting Joe into one of those bodysuits. I explained what was going on between Joe and me and basically volunteered to join the fight if he would spare Joe. I had a feeling that Joe might just prove more useful as he was anyway. With his contacts as a private investigator and the backing of the rich and powerful family that was in his debt, he could definitely be an asset in the battle against the Arcanians. After a couple of hours of talking with Joe joining in, Link decided that we were right about Joe and, in addition, Dana decided that she would join the fight of her own free will as well. Link told us that this would involve our going through the conversion process, meaning that we would actually become real, fully functioning females, but it was either that or the same result with our minds being erased and reprogrammed. Link was in favor of our volunteering because he felt we could be more effective as willing agents than we could ever be as pre-programmed human robots, so to speak. So, when Frank returned from the airport with the doctor, Dana and I underwent the process, and the combination of Dr. Kulwicki's revolutionary process and the Alphen's fast healing technology Dana and I became fully functioning females in only about 2 days, including the time for the actual surgery. During the recovery period, a couple of things happened. First of all, Joe proposed to me. Second, Frank proposed to Dana. It seems that Frank had been attracted to Dana at first look and was only being held back by the fact that he and Dana were men. As soon as he knew that Dana was going to willingly join the fight and become a real woman, he professed his feelings for her and, when she had healed, she accepted. We had a double ceremony about a month after the surgery. The girls from Age D served as bridesmaids and Carrie was our maiden of honor. Mr. Franklin/Ms. Smith gave both Dana and I away, and Link served double duty as best man to both Frank and Joe. Following a brief honeymoon, Dana and I entered phase 2 of the training involving self-defense and espionage techniques, which was made a lot easier by the programming available to us through Link. I was blissfully happy as Joe's wife, and, confidentially, the sex was great. Joe was as good a lover as he was a PI, which means that he was damned good. There were more adventures ahead for all of us, but I have to end this one here. My instructor is calling us to class. Today we begin learning weapons use, and the Alphans have some really advanced weaponry. All in all, I don't regret any of what happened, even if some of it was forced on me. In the long run, I got a great job, a lot of adventures, and a wonderful husband out of the deal. Not too bad for a college dropout, farm kid, huh? The end. Please subscribe to my channel and leave your valuable opinion. Thanks.